Okay, so I believe we're live. So if you're watching the replay, it's great to have you here. I'm just going to be going through a few things over the next 10 minutes, just while I wait for people to enter the room. So sit tight and everything is going to be coming up very soon. So just to remind you of what you're here for today, we're going to be covering the 12 steps to killer vocals. And these are specific mixing steps that are going to help you to take your vocal recorded at home to that professional studio level. And we're also going to touch on recording because, that's so important. Without a good recording, you're never going to have a good vocal. You can't get a great sound out of a poor recording. So we're going to touch on that a bit, more specifically acoustic treatment and microphone placement, but mostly we're going to be focusing on those 12 steps. So stick around if you want to learn what those steps are, and I'm going to tell you how to integrate every single one of these tools and techniques in your own mixes. I'm going to try and keep it nice and simple. So not getting audio. So as you come in, if we've got people joining me here live, give me a shout if you can see and hear me okay. Brody, can you hear me okay now? If you can just confirm that. Otherwise, I might have to rejoin quickly. So as you're coming in, as you're joining us, Peter, hi. Let me know where you're watching from. I always love to see where we've got people from all over the world. And just say hi, introduce yourself. This is going to be quite a nice little group of people here. Not going to be too crazy, I don't think. Just a nice little group. And for everyone that's joining now, just to remind you again, we're here today to cover those 12 steps to killer vocals, 12 specific mixing steps. So introduce yourself. I'll be starting in about 10 minutes. We're just going to wait 10 minutes or so for everyone to join and get into the room here. First of all, thank you everyone for being here live. I'm starting to do quite a lot of these live sessions, and I just absolutely love it because I really think that it's a great way to talk to you all. So please do introduce yourself as soon as you've joined in. So we've got Peter from France/Switzerland, very nice. Athens, Greece. We've got Michael from Australia. Must be late there, Michael. We've got Ontario. Brody says, I'm usually the moderator for webinars, so it's great being on the other end. Yeah, well, probably high standards then, Brody. Hopefully I can impress you. So anyone that's joining now, just introduce yourself. I'm going to be sharing my personal templates in about 15 minutes. If you haven't got them already, I've given them out a few times now. So if you've been to any of these webinars, these live workshops before, you might already have them. But if you don't, I'm going to be sharing them again today. So these are normally $10 each, and that's for each DAW. So Logic, Studio One, Pro Tools, and Cubase. I'm going to be giving them away for free to everyone that's here attending live, just as a way of saying thank you for being here, because I absolutely love doing these sessions with you all here watching. So just waiting another few minutes for everyone to join in. We've got Jesus from Mexico. Hi, Jesus. We've got Shannon. We've got Jintara, so if I said that right, from Lithuania. Bo from Texas. Paul Abel from Barcelona. Rickard from Sweden. So we've got lots of Europe at the moment. Where's all the States? Peter, I'm a student in sound engineering. 1 more year left. This webinar is going to help me so much. Hopefully I can. That's a lot to live up to, but I'll do my best, Peter. Simone, thanks for joining us. Mark, great to have you here. So we're going to be doing a Q&A as well at the end after doing the workshop section. So if you're struggling with anything in particular right now, if there's a certain problem you're having in your mixes, in your recordings, anything like that, stick around to the end, because in the Q&A, I'm going to be going through answering your questions, doing my best to help you with whatever you're struggling with, and to hopefully get you some quicker results. Just got a dog hair on the microphone there. Lovely. So stick around for the Q&A at the end if you are struggling with anything in particular, and I'll do my best to help you. Another cool thing for being here live, I've got some special bonuses. If any of you have been following the Produce Pro Vocals launch this week, which we've just opened up for new students, I've got some unique bonuses just for people who are here watching live. 2 free bonuses that you can't get anywhere else. So that's coming up as well. So anyone that's joining us now, please feel free to introduce yourself. Let me know where you're from, where you're watching from. Say hi, and let's see if we've got all the concepts covered. So we've got Jerry from Berkeley, Michigan. Here we go. Here's the States. Murica, that's John. Cole from Indiana. Hello from Canada. Atlanta, El Salvador. Very nice. Atlanta, Georgia. Cool. So we've got a few more minutes here, just while we wait for everyone to join. There is actually, if you want to grab these now while we're waiting, the slides from this workshop. You should be able to see that now. If we check that, that seems to be working. So if you grab that, you should see a button that says download there. And that's going to be the slides that I'm using. Just for future reference, if you want to recap anything that we're going to cover here, that would just make it a bit easier for you. For anyone that's just joined us, quick reminder of what we're here to cover today: 12 steps to killer vocals. So it's going to be mostly mixing that we're focusing on today. 12 specific mixing steps, techniques, tools that you can implement in your mixes to take your mixes to the next level, to that studio quality, even if your vocals were recorded at home. And we're going to touch on that as well, because if you can't get it right in the recording phase, then mixing is hopeless. Essentially, you need to get it right in the recording phase if you want to get a good sound. So we're going to touch on recording a bit, but mostly here today, we're going to be focusing on those 12 mixing steps. And this is kind of a complete system. And I'll elaborate on this a lot more, but you're not going to implement every single one of these 12 steps every time you go to mix a vocal. Most of them are optional, but going through these 12 steps and in your head thinking, okay, do I need to implement this step? Yes or no? And then continue, do I need to implement this step? Yes or no? And you go through these steps, these 12 steps like that, and that's going to take your vocals to that next level, to that studio quality, make them sound expensive, mainstream, all of that cool stuff that we want. So we've got Paul from Belgium, another Paul from Phoenix, Arizona, Ram from India, thanks for joining us, Ram, Geoff from Florida. And if anyone else is joining us now, please do introduce yourself. Troy at the LA Film School Hollywood, very nice. And if you're just joining us, you should see a download button there as well. At the moment, that's just the slides from the presentation that I'm going to be diving into in about 5 minutes, just for you to use in the future as a reference. And then in about 10 minutes time, I'll be sharing those DAW templates. So these templates are just for you to kind of say thank you for joining me live. So you download them: Studio One, Cubase, what are the other ones? Logic Pro and Pro Tools. And you download them, you load them up, and it's got all my vocal processing chain. So these 12 steps you're about to learn are pretty much all in that template. So again, bypass them all. You don't want to do all of them. And I'll elaborate on that in a lot more detail. But get those templates, and then that's going to just at least give you an idea of how I set up my mixes, and you can replicate that. You're probably going to be different, but that might save you a bit of time on that front. And then you can actually use that vocal processing chain, plugin chain, just to save you a bit of time. So I'm going to be sharing them in about 10 minutes. Unfortunately, no templates for Ableton Live at the moment. If there's enough demand, I'd be happy to create more. But at the moment, what I'm going to be sharing with you today, those templates are for Logic Pro, Pro 10, but it'll probably work in earlier versions, Pro Tools and Studio One and Cubase. So they're the 4 DAWs. So we've got Bobby from Raleigh. I hope I said that right. Ted from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Thanks for joining us, Ted. Don from Toronto. Elias from the Netherlands. If you're just joining us now, give us a shout, say hi, and we'll see if we've got all the continents covered here. And I'm going to be starting in just a few minutes with those 12 steps for killer vocals. That's what we're covering today. And for anyone else that's just joined us, if you've been following the Produce Pro Vocals launch this week, so we're open for new students. If you're interested in that, I've got some really exciting bonuses to share with you at the end. That's only for you here because you're watching this. 2 free bonuses that no one else can get anywhere else. So that's coming up right at the end. So stick around if you are interested in joining us for the masterclass as well. So we've got a few requests for templates for Reaper. Cool. I'd be happy to do that. I absolutely love Reaper. And we've got Jeppe from Denmark. Thanks for joining us. Steve from Steve O from Virginia. Jonathan, hey Jonathan, hope you're well. Johan from Sweden, Robbie from Texas, and another Jonathan, this time from Canada. So thanks for joining me, everyone. I absolutely love doing these live things because it's so cool to know that we've got people from all over the world here. All musicians, all into engineering, all committed, which is the nice thing. That's why I love this so much, because everyone here is clearly committed to really improving their mixes and their music, which is incredible. And I'm so honored to be here with you, sharing hopefully some wisdom and some of my own experience to save you a bit of time. So thanks for joining me, everyone. I think this is going to be a really cool session. We've got a lot to cover. It is going to be pretty fast paced. So I would recommend taking notes, but you should see that button now, the download button, that will take you to a link where you can get the slides from this workshop, and that's going to help you to kind of recap anything that you miss if we do move a bit too quickly. So if you're wondering, is this for beginners? Is this for intermediate? I'm going to try and cover all the bases, start from the absolute basics, but we are going to go quite in depth here as well. So again, if it feels a bit fast paced, just make sure you download those slides and you can kind of go back and recap anything. There will be a replay available as well. If you're watching this live right now, there will be a replay available. So if you want to go back over this and recap anything, be sure to check that out. And that's going to be available for a few more days. So we've got Leonard from Indiana. Thanks for joining us. Hey, Lajan. Paul, also a request for Reaper. Okay, cool. I'll bear that in mind. Tariq, thanks for joining us. Barb from New York, very nice. So going to be starting in just a few seconds here. We've got a nice little group of people ready to go. Not too huge, which is nice. I think the Q&A session at the end is going to be pretty fun. Hopefully everyone here, anyone that's got questions here, I should be able to work through pretty much all of them. Going to be sticking around for a while. So definitely worth sticking around for that Q&A at the end. That'll probably be in about 45 minutes or so. But stick around for that if you are struggling with anything in particular right now, because I know what it's like sometimes when you're finding something difficult, you're having a specific problem with your mixes. And no matter how much you Google, how much you read, it's sometimes hard to get advice that's really tailored to what you need right now. So that's why Q&A sessions are great, because hopefully I can give you some very specific advice. So if you are struggling with anything, stick around for that Q&A at the end. Reno, do you ever do out-of-the-box info? Not particularly, mostly just because I'm not the out-the-box kind of guy. So most of what I talk about and teach will apply to out-of-the-box hardware. I don't generally go specific on certain plugins, that kind of stuff. It's all general, so you can apply it to out-of-the-box. In the members area, I do have some stuff coming up about different compressor types and hardware compressors. So every now and then, but mostly in the box. And that's really because I truly believe you don't need hardware anymore. You really don't need hardware anymore. The cons of working in the box far outweigh the cons of working with hardware. So generally not Reno. Peter, I also say yes for Ableton, even though I do all my mixing and recording on Pro Tools. So interesting, Peter. Do you use Ableton for production, and do you use Pro Tools for recording and mixing? Maybe. Anyway, let's dive in here. So it's 6 o'clock here. Time to dive in. Probably could be 10 o'clock in the morning for you. Could be Wednesday, early Wednesday morning. We had some from Australia here. But either way, I think we've got a good group here. So let's crack on. And like I said, this is going to be pretty fast paced. So make sure you check out that replay if you do want to go back over anything. But what I'm going to do now is just turn off my webcam, and I'm going to move over to the presentation. Okay, so hopefully everyone can now see the presentation. I can still see the chat box, so let me know if there's any problems with audio. If you can just type yes in here, if you can see and hear me okay, before I move on with this. So if you can see the presentation, it should say Produce Pro Vocals. If you can hear my voice, just type yes into the chat box. And as soon as I've got some confirmations, I will crack on with this. Okay, cool. Cool, thanks a lot. So let's do this. So we're here today to cover the 12 steps to killer vocals. And this is what you're going to be learning. You're going to learn the 2 factors that decide the quality of the vocal before you even hit record. So those 12 steps are mixing steps. But before we move on to those, I just want to make sure we kind of cover all the bases here, talk about recording a bit, because it is so important. So I didn't want to skip over that, but then we're going to move on to those 12 potential steps that make vocals recorded at home sound professional. And just want to emphasize that potential there, because I'm not expecting you to implement every single one of these steps. I'm going to elaborate more on this later, but these are 12 potential steps. You go through each of these steps and say, do I need to do this? Do I not? And then you move on. So you're also going to learn the knock-on effects that killer vocals can have on your music, because we're talking about vocals here specifically, but of course, in the grand scheme of things, in the bigger picture, vocals are so important, and we're going to talk about that a bit more. And you're also going to, at the end, learn about how you can take a step closer to your goals, and get some further training in the form of Produce Pro vocals. And if any of you have been following that this week, and you're interested in that, I have 2 very special bonuses to share with you. So stick around for those as well if you're thinking about joining us for that masterclass. So we have a lot to cover. So as ever, I just have a few quick requests before we start. So close down any other tabs or windows. I know how tempting it is. I've sat through webinars before where I get distracted pretty quickly, and then suddenly you go back and you kind of lost your place. So I recommend closing down any other tabs or windows if you have them open, and just remove any other distractions in the environment. And that's going to help you to really take this all in. Grab a pen and paper or open your favorite note-taking software. Like I said, we're going to be moving pretty quick here, and we've got a lot to cover. I'm going to be sharing my DAW templates in just a few minutes for anyone that's waiting for those. And also, I will be taking questions at the end. So there will be a live Q&A session. I'm not going to take questions as we're going. I'm going to stay in the flow of this, and try and keep it concise. So if you do have questions, please feel free to post them. You should see the option if you click the little chat bubble next to where it says write your message here. If you click on that, you can change your kind of chat type to a question, and that's going to flag that up. So if you do that, it's going to be a lot easier for me to see your question. So feel free to ask questions as we're going, but I'll wait till the end to cover them. So before we even get into vocal recording, I just want to take a step back here and talk about why home recording is so important. And I'm going to go out there and say that the vast majority of people here are mostly recording at home. And that's very much who this workshop is targeted at. In fact, that's who pretty much everything I teach is targeted at. So why home recording? Why is home recording so brilliant? Why is it such a great thing? Well, more and more chart-topping music is being produced at home. That's just a fact. And in addition to that, thanks to the internet, you can now have direct contact with your fans. So there's no need to go through a publisher or record label. So these 2 things combined, home recording, being able to be self-sufficient, have control over your own music, the whole creative process, not having to pay for studio time, all that kind of stuff. And also this direct contact you can have with your fans, this new music industry where you don't need a middleman. You can have direct contact through email, through social media. You can be completely independent. You don't need a huge following. You just need a small following to be a successful musician. So these 2 things combine. And this means that in this kind of new music industry, it's quite easy. And, the best route, I think, is to be a self-made musician. And the benefits of being a completely self-sufficient, being completely self-made, are that you get the freedom to do what you want. You get the fulfillment from really interacting with your fans directly, and ultimately just the joy of doing what you love. So that's really how it all kind of fits together for me, to take a step back there and look at the bigger picture. And the kind of ultimate message I want to convey here is that you can be self-sufficient and successful. And most people here are already going down this path. If you're here now learning about vocal recording, then you're already being self-sufficient, which is awesome. And that's just the kind of the way that home recording fits into this. Working in studios doesn't really work too well with that old way of doing things. So home recording fits perfectly into this new music industry. And just to give you some examples here of musicians who self-produce, write all their own music, release all their own music, market all their own music, are completely self-sufficient. Macklemore, Alex Goot, and Chance the Rapper, just 3 examples to give you there. So now we covered why home recording is important. Well, why vocals? Why focus on the vocals? Well, as the vocals get better, the entire mix does. And what you learn about vocal production translates into the rest of the mix. So there's 2 elements here. First of all, as you improve the vocals, the mix gets better because that's the focal point for most people. And it's such a big part of the mix. It's the most important part in the majority of cases. So this in turn improves the entire mix. But also when you learn about vocal production and you focus on that, what you're learning about getting vocals right, recording them well, mixing them well, translates into the rest of the mix. And suddenly it's easier to mix all these other instruments. So the kind of knock-on effect of this is that when you focus on the vocals, your music also becomes more emotional and relatable, because the vocals are the focal point. So if the vocals are lacking, if they don't sound great, if they're hard to hear, the listener can't connect to the music, and that's what's important. So making the vocals sound amazing just makes the music you produce become more emotional and relatable. In turn, this gets you more fans and takes you a big step closer to your goals as a musician. So that's why I think it's important to focus on vocals. But now, why me? Who am I to teach you this? Well, to go right back to the beginning, I'm the same as many of you. I wanted to record my band quite a long time ago now, over 12 years ago. So I started recording at home. That's how most people start out. Now, let me make it very clear that I do not have any big credits to my name. But what I think is important is that I've been recording and mixing at home almost every day for over a decade, as both a musician and as a freelance mix engineer. So I'm not giving you advice here from a professional studio. I'm not talking here about, how to record vocals and mix vocals to a high standard where you've already got thousands and thousands worth of equipment and the perfectly tuned room. What I'm talking to you here about specifically is recording and mixing at home. And that is what really matters. So just to kind of give you my quick philosophy to see if you agree with this, I love to create new things that have an impact on the lives of others, and I love the fulfillment and recognition that follows. And that's what I want to get for you. I believe that everyone has the ability to produce great music, to share it with the world and get the appreciation they deserve, regardless of their skill level or budget. And hopefully you agree with that too, because that is absolutely a fact. You can't really argue that. So my mission is to help you realize this by only teaching you what you need to know so you can get results fast. And just to kind of give you some context here, I'm not new to this either. I've been teaching for a long time, as well as mixing and being a musician. Just one of my courses on Udemy here, just to give you a quick example, has over 1,400 ratings and over 8,000 students, and that's just one course. So hopefully that just removes any doubts that you have. So now let's just cover some common myths quickly before we dive into this. First myth that I want to kind of open up and expose is that you need professional studios, because that's absolutely not true. We've kind of covered this. Some people still think that you need a professional studio to get a professional studio sound, and that's not true. With modern hardware, especially affordable equipment and in-the-box mixing, plugins are amazing, even the stock plugins that come with your DAW. And there's such an abundance of information now that anyone can learn this stuff. So you really don't need professional studios. And myth number 2 is that you need expensive equipment and plugins. And that kind of follows on from that. You don't need studios because you don't need that equipment and you don't need expensive plugins. You can get great results with the gear you already have and stock plugins. It's all about just practicing and developing your skills. Now, another myth is that you need loads of free time to learn these skills, because depending on how you go about it, it really doesn't have to take a lot of time. First of all, you don't need to know absolutely everything. You can focus on the stuff that really matters, and that's going to get you results fast. But also just try and be efficient with your time, because I know a lot of you will have commitments outside of music. Some of you will be professional musicians, but a lot of you will just be, I don't want to say amateur musicians, but it's a hobby that you're just so passionate about. And maybe in the future, it'll be your full-time work. But at the moment, you have a job, you have a family, you have other commitments outside of music. So don't get put down and kind of depressed about the fact that it's going to take a ton of time to learn this stuff, because it really doesn't have to. Myth number 4 is that you need to be naturally talented. No one's born naturally talented. You just have to work at it. And myth number 5 is that you need to be famous to be a successful musician. And again, this just simply isn't true with this new music industry. With just 1,000 true fans, and if you Google that, it's a great article written by Kevin Kelly. The idea is that you only need 1,000 true fans to make a living as a musician, as an artist. So you don't need to be uber famous and have millions and millions of followers in the new music industry, because you can have direct contact with those fans. So I just wanted to bust some common myths there. So what I'm going to do now is just remove those slides. Hopefully everyone's grabbed those. And I'm just going to load up the templates. So what you should see in a second is a download link where you can grab the DAW templates. And just download these quickly now. This is just my way of saying thank you for being here live. Thanks for turning up. Again, I love doing these sessions. It's so cool to hang out with you all. So this is just my way of saying thanks. Hopefully can help you speed up your progress a bit just by taking a look at these templates. You don't have to use them, but just seeing how someone else structures their projects. It's got my vocal processing chain that we're going to be covering here, so you can bypass all those plugins and then take a look at them individually. So just download them. It's a zip file. Just hit that download button to grab those files. Don't open them up yet or worry about that. Page not found. This could be an issue. So what I'll do, I will come back to this. So anyone here, if you're having issues, I'll make sure that the email with the link to the replay has a link to these DAW templates as well. So apologies for that. There must be an issue there somewhere. I'll come back to this at the end, but you can also grab them in that email. So look out for that. So I'll remove that for now and sort that out in a second. So let's dive in now onto vocals. And first, before we talk about mixing, I just want to cover some really kind of crucial stuff in relation to recording. Because if you can't get right in the recording phase, you're never going to have a good mix. The quality of a mix is decided in the recording phase. So you really need to focus on this. So there's two important factors: acoustic treatment and microphone placement. And these are in general important, but especially with vocal production, even more important. So just going to cover this very quickly. Acoustic treatment doesn't have to cost you a fortune. So you can build your own panels, and I highly recommend you do that when you have the time. Or you can just use stuff lying around your home. So the main aim here is just to reduce the reverb in the room. And this is specifically for recording vocals. We're not talking about acoustic treatment for mixing here. We're not talking about recording bass guitar or drums or anything like that. When you're recording vocals, your main aim is to reduce the reverb in the room. So it's not overly complicated. Another aim is to reduce the direct reflections from nearby surfaces. So if you imagine if you position the microphone right next to a flat wall, a flat surface, the sound is going to reflect off that. That's going to cause all kind of issues. So that's another aim with your acoustic treatment. So what can you use? Well, if you don't have time to build panels, mattresses are great. A lot of effort, mattresses in the recording room, but it's a free, it doesn't take too much time, a very cost-effective way of just treating the room, killing the reverb a bit. Position that in the middle of the room. We're going to talk about placement in a second, and that's going to make a huge difference. But you can also use thick drapes and curtains, especially if you have windows, and even duvets. Not as good, but they're going to help a bit just to absorb some of that reverb. So where do you put it? Well, the first place you want to put treatment is behind the vocalist's head. And a lot of people think, well, you know, it seems logical. The first place to put treatment is behind the microphone, but most of the microphones we're using are going to be cardioid. And I highly recommend you use cardioid microphones when you're recording at home. So that means they reject sound from the rear. So placing treatment behind the microphone isn't really doing much because the mic's already rejecting sound from behind it. So instead, think about where the mic's pointing at the vocalist. It's going to be picking up a lot of reflections from behind the vocalist's head. So that's the first place you want to put treatment, is just behind the vocalist's head. And this is where you could position a mattress stood upright, or position a panel on a mic stand, or however you want to do this. After that, you can try placing treatment to the side of the mic, and placing treatment behind will help as well because that's the way that the vocals are projecting. So that will help. Just a kind of quick idea there of how you could treat your room. An even quicker way, if you don't want to think about this too much, is you can just create a kind of makeshift vocal booth in your room. Whether this is with panels or with mattresses, you can just create a triangle or a square around the vocalist. And that's just going to kill the reverb in all directions. So, distance to the microphone. First of all, you need to know the microphone type. And this is something that a lot of people surprisingly get wrong. So if it's a condenser microphone, you want to be, around 5 to 10 inches. That's just a guideline. But as soon as you start getting closer than 5 inches, especially with cardioid microphones, you're going to get the proximity effect. And for some people, they think, this makes the vocal sound warm. But in the context of a mix, generally, it's not the sound you want. And it's always going to sound better if you're further back. It opens up the vocal. You get the top end that you need. It also means variations in distance. If the vocalist is moving around a lot like this, and they're really close, you can hear these huge changes in the tone of their voice like that, right? If they're a bit further away and they move around, it's not as noticeable. So Back off from the mic with condenser microphones. But, and this is why it's important, you know, the microphone type, if you're using a dynamic microphone, they're designed to be used up close. And I'm talking about things like the SM58 here. They have a cut in the bottom end to account for the proximity effect, because they're designed more for kind of live use. But they sound great in studio too, especially in home studio. So if you're using a dynamic mic, you want to be closer. The key here, though, is that you just experiment with distance to find the right tone. And this is how you get the sound and the tone that you want. It's in the recording phase, by trying different mics, by trying different distances, not in the mixing phase. You need to get the tone you want now before you start mixing, and then you kind of nudge it in the right direction with mixing. So another good guideline to remember is just that it's better to be too far than too close, especially when you're using condenser microphones. So that's it for recording. Just really wanted to drill that in, because if you don't get that right, then your mixes are never going to sound good. And you need to really get the tone you want in the recording phase. But now we can move on to mixing, because this is the fun stuff. This is where the magic happens. Once you've got a great sounding vocal recording, this is when it really comes to life, and you start to really bring out the pleasing elements of it, and get that finished, polished, expensive sound. So what are the 12 steps? And this is just the kind of complete mix of a vocal. These are the 12 steps that I go through every time I mix a vocal. And they are gain automation, gain staging, surgical EQ, de-essing, compressor number 1, tonal EQ, compressor number 2, saturation, limiting, reverb and delay, frequency slotting, and finally automation. So that's going to be a bit overwhelming right now. If you've been following the free workshop last week, if you watch those videos, you'll be familiar with this already. So hopefully that will give you a bit of a head start. But if this is new to you, these 12 steps, don't feel overwhelmed. We're going to go through this in more detail. Just make sure you grab the slides if you want to go back over this. And this is also covered in much more detail in the full Produce Pro Vocals course. But what I'm going to do now, and for the rest of this presentation pretty much, is just go through each of these steps and outline what's happening at each step, how to approach each technique, each tool, to give you really a overview of the entire vocal mixing process from start to finish. So I'm hoping this will, you'll come away from this with a really good idea of how to approach your next mix. So I'm going to go into as much depth as I can. So let's get started. So gain automation is that first step. And this is part of the preparation phase. So there's this distinction between the preparation phase and the mixing phase. And this is vital because you need to spend time preparing your mixes. It's something that so many people skip when they first start out. But it's such an important part of the mixing process is preparation. So these first few steps are all taking part in the preparation phase. And what I mean by that is this is before you've started mixing with the whole mixing. So you're just loading up the tracks, or if it's your own music, you kind of take a break and maybe start a new project. And you're just preparing the mix, you're organizing it, and doing various other things before you really start mixing and start listening on your monitors with the full mix on and that kind of stuff. So gain automation, this is the first step. Now, the consideration here is that for a modern sound, the vocals need to be uber consistent. It's just what we're used to hearing. When you listen to vocals on the radio, or just most music, even if it's not mainstream music, every word is just so intelligible. Every lyric is audible. Every syllable is pretty much the same volume. That's just what we're used to hearing, unless it's a live performance, of course. But for a finished sound, the vocals need to be so consistent in volume. And this is a problem because actually in real life, the vocals vary so much. And in one song, a vocalist can go from whispering to shouting. So there's so much variation. So using automation is integral because it makes the job easier for the compressor. So that's the issue. Vocals are really dynamic. The problem is that we need them to be really consistent. So there's this variation in loudness that we need to really rein in. A lot of people, to do that, will use a compressor. That's the job of a compressor. But with compression alone, you can't get the crazy level of consistency that you need for that modern, polished, finished vocal sound. So you need to use automation, and this makes it easier for the compressor. And the reason this is making it easier for the compressor is because here we're talking about gain automation. So this is automating the level or the volume before compression. And this is the key thing here. So we're getting these consistent levels before we compress it. And this means that the compressor is not dealing with these wild peaks and this huge variation in volume. It's already kind of tame before we put compression on. So in some genres, and this is what you need to consider, heavy compression isn't appropriate. So in this case, automation is even more important, because if it's a rock track or a heavy track, sometimes you can get away with just whacking, really aggressive compression on it. And it sounds stylistic, it sounds right. And at the same time, we get that kind of even consistency in the dynamics that we need. But for a lot of genres, namely most mainstream genres, lighter genres, heavy compression just doesn't sound quite right. So this is where automation becomes even more important. And again, the key here is that you draw in automation before the compressor in the signal chain. So we're just automating, and what I mean by that is drawing it in. And look up how to do automation in your DAW if you've not done this before. But you essentially draw it in, and you just find any waveforms, any loud words or syllables that are too loud, and you pull them down. And any words that are too quiet, you pull them up. And you can do this by the phrase, you can do this by the word. It's up to you how much detail you want to go into. But you want to automate the volume in the signal chain. And you can do that in a number of ways. You can either use step gain automation, Pro Tools to do that, or you can automate the volume directly on the vocal channel and then change the output to a new auxiliary channel, a new bus channel, something like that, and apply your compression there. So then the volume fade is getting automated directly on the vocal channel, and then it's getting sent to another channel where you're then applying compression. So again, the automation is first. So then once you've done that, you've got a pretty consistent level in the vocal. But now you need to just check the gain, and you just want to make sure you've got plenty of headroom, especially with vocals, because the vocals are generally the most important part. So if you need to turn them up to bring them up in the mix, you want to have lots of headroom to be able to do that, because if they're nearly peaking on the channel meter and then you turn it up, it's going to start clipping. So you need to make sure you have plenty of headroom. And how you do this, you just take a look at the channel meter in your DAW on the channel and see where it's peaking. Try and get it peaking below -10 dBFS. Ideally averaging around -18, but it doesn't have to be exactly around -18. Just make sure it's peaking below -10. And if it's not, if it's peaking at -6, so it's too loud, or if it's peaking at -30 and it's way too quiet, then just load up a trim plugin and adjust the gain with that. And do this in the first plugin slot. So you can use any plugin that lets you adjust gain. A lot of DAWs now will have a dedicated gain or trim plugin that lets you do this. If you don't have that, just load up a EQ just with no boost or cuts on it, and just use the output gain to either lower or raise the gain, just so you've got that headroom. So that's gain staging. We're still in the prep phase here. This is before you started mixing. So you're doing all of this in solo. So then next we have surgical EQ. And again, this is still part of the prep phase. So a lot of people, when they think about EQ, it's very much part of the mixing phase. This is generally where you apply EQ, when you start mixing, not when you're prepping and organizing your files, right? But doing this in the preparation phase is just saving you time. It means you have to spend less time mixing when it gets to the full mix. So that's the benefit here. Now, recording at home usually means that you're recording in a less than ideal environment. You're recording in a room that was designed to be a bed, a living room, or an office, not a dedicated studio. So because of this, you generally get ugly resonances, room resonances, builds up, certain frequencies build up because of the dimensions of your room, and they become louder, and they become so loud that they sound ugly. They sound cloudy. They really kind of clog up the sound of the vocal. So what you do is you use the boost and sweep technique, and this is where you just grab a single band on your EQ, make it narrow, and apply a 10 dB boost, and just sweep it up and down the frequency spectrum until you notice a sudden increase in volume. And this is when you know, okay, so the volume suddenly increased when I was boosting, let's say 800 hertz. There must be a buildup of frequencies there. You found the room resonances. But you want to be wary of the lower mid. So anything below 500 hertz, you could just be boosting the fundamental of the note. So if the vocalist is singing a certain note and the fundamental of that note is 300 hertz, just to chuck a number out there, and you boost 300 hertz, when they sing that note, it's suddenly going to sound a lot louder. And this makes you think that, oh, I found a room resonance, but you haven't. You've just boosted the fundamental frequencies. So generally, you find these ugly room resonances between 500 hertz and 1 kilohertz. Sometimes higher, but this is just kind of the common area I find with vocals that are recorded at home, and it will depend on the size of the room, but normally it's between 500 and 1 kilohertz. Sometimes it's a bit lower, sometimes it is 400. Again, just be sure that you're not just boosting a note. And sometimes it's higher. Sometimes you have really harsh kind of resonances above 1 kilohertz, but they're generally not as noticeable. I find that the worst ones are normally between 500 and 1 kilohertz. So we're still in the prep phase here. So you can do this in solo. And you may have heard before, never use the solo button because it doesn't help you to make decisions in the solo things. You're EQing them on their own, but the listener's never going to hear them on their own, right? So you want to avoid the solo button. But this is a case where you can use the solo button, because what we're doing here is we're not trying to improve the tone of the vocal necessarily in the context of the mix. We're just trying to find this ugliness and just get rid of it. So you can do this in solo while you're preparing your mix. And then once you find these horrible resonances, just notch them out with a narrow cut, that should say, not a narrow boost. That's the complete opposite. So you want to notch these out with a narrow cut. So you want to maybe -3, just with a narrow bandwidth, maybe more. And you just want to bypass that a few times just to check you're making an improvement. And generally what you find is when you find these resonances and you notch them out, even though it doesn't make a huge difference to the tone of the vocal, when you bring that EQ back in and you're cutting those resonances out, it just cleans up the sound so much. And that's what we're trying to do here, is just clean up the sound of the vocal before we start mixing. So that's prep. Now we can move on to mixing. So all that I've talked about so far, this is before you even really start mixing. This is when you're preparing your mix, organizing it, checking your gain, moving your channels around, all that kind of stuff. But now we can move on to mixing. So a couple of things just to bear in mind as we go through the rest of these steps. First of all, they're all optional. I'm not telling you to do every single one of these things, because that's never the case, or it's very rarely the case at least. So all of these steps are optional, and it's rare that you'd want to employ all of them, because that's probably going to result in an over-processed vocal. Now, also consider is going to vary genre. So some is cool processing, mainstream music, a lot of pop music, a lot of dance music, that kind of stuff requires a lot of processing, a lot of finishing. Rock music is going to be heavily processed in the sense that it's probably really heavily compressed, whereas acoustic genres and lighter genres are going to have minimal processing. So just bear that in mind as well. And also bear in mind that plugin order varies. So I'm giving you these 12 more in the way that I think of them. The order that I go through, okay, I need to employ this step. Doing this, necessarily, it's the exact plugin order. In a lot of cases, you're going to learn some exceptions where it's not. So just remember that the plugin order varies. You do it roughly in this order that I'm going to go through now. But also remember that it's really not as important as many people make out. It's subjective. It makes such a small difference. If you spend loads of time worrying about the order of your plugins, you're focusing on the wrong things. It doesn't matter if you EQ or compress first. If you notice one way set, do that. No exact rule. I kind of have my way of just but it's by no means the only way. So just remember, plugin order varies. So let's continue now with those steps. First of all, we have de-essing. Now, just quickly, if anyone's having any issues with audio, hopefully it's not on my end. There is a reconnect button under the video that you can hit, and that will reconnect you to the feed if you are having issues or it's breaking up or anything like that. And if you're still having issues, let me know, guys, and I can always try reconnecting but hopefully it's not on my end. So let me know if just reconnecting now fixes that for you. So a couple of people as well looking for those slides again, so I'll load them up. And once we finish with this, I will load up the DAW templates as well. So let's continue. So if you're having audio issues, try reconnecting. But now let's move on to de-essing. So first of all, what is a de-esser? Well, a de-esser is a tool that removes sibilance. And sibilance is just all those S sounds. So any words that have S in them, like sibilance, it's that kind of that sizzle. That's what sibilance is. And as soon as you start EQing a vocal, which we'll talk about in a second, and you start boosting the top end or you boost the upper mids, generally it makes the vocal even more sibilant. But before you even think about EQ, just from recording alone with condenser mics, sibilance is just generally a problem. It's kind of unavoidable. You can try different microphone techniques to reduce it if it's really an issue, but generally you do have to apply some de-essing to kind of control that sibilance. And they work by only compressing the guilty frequencies when they get loud. So when those S frequencies, which are normally between 5K and 8K, when they start to get too loud, the compressor's listening for that, or the de-esser rather, and when they get too loud, it clamps down on them without affecting the rest of the sound. It's a form of multiband compression. So that's what a de-esser is. And they are generally needed, even if it's just subtle. Even if you spend ages reducing sibilance in the recording phase, in general, you do have to kind of apply some de-essing just to rein it in a bit. So bear that in mind. Even if it's just subtle, you probably will need some. Now, again, to go back to the plugin order thing, sometimes it works well right at the beginning, sometimes at the very end. And it just varies. I'll normally address it early on just to kind of nip it in the bud. But sometimes I don't notice that there's too much of an issue with sibilance, so I kind of skip this step. And then at the very end, I think, actually, you know what, this could do with some de-essing. So then I had a de-esser plugin at the end. And sometimes it works better at the end, sometimes right at the beginning. Just move it around and see what works best. So now, the first compressor. This is where we're getting into the fun stuff. Now, in most genres, at least one compressor is needed, usually more. So we've gone through, and hopefully you take that advice that you really need to automate the vocal to get it to that modern level of consistency, because that's just so important. But even after you've done that, you still need compression to rein in the dynamics even more. And what we're doing here really is controlling the dynamics on a smaller scale. So automation does all the heavy lifting. That's when you're bringing up words that are too quiet, too loud, or whole sections, phrases that are too quiet, too loud, to get everything nice and consistent. But then compression is on a much smaller scale, because we're talking about microseconds here. So we're now leveling out the dynamics, controlling the dynamics, getting that consistency, but in conjunction with automation on a smaller scale. Now, the amount of gain reduction you apply, and I don't want to talk too much now about how compression works, but gain reduction is just the amount that the compressor is clamping down. It's the amount that it's reducing the gain when it engages. And this is kind of the main parameter of compression. A high amount of gain reduction, you're going to really hear the compression. It's going to really level out the dynamics. A very small amount of gain reduction is going to be much subtler and less noticeable, but again, not going to have as much dynamic consistency there. So the amount of gain reduction you apply really does depend on the genre. So for light genres like jazz, acoustic, that kind of stuff, you're going to want less gain reduction. You want it to be subtle and musical, just kind of nudging it in the right direction. Mainstream music's kind of down the middle. You need that control of compression, and you want even more consistency. So you do have to go a bit more aggressive. But for the heavier genres like rock music, hardcore music, you can go much more aggressive with your gain reduction, because this is just the sound of vocals in these genres. They're heavily compressed, so you can get away with it. So what about the settings? Well, you want the compressor to be constantly engaging and disengaging, not just catching the louder peaks. Because what we're doing here with this first compressor is just, again, to reiterate, just trying to control the dynamics. So we want it to kind of be constantly working. We don't necessarily just want to catch the louder peaks here. We can do that later on, and we'll talk about that later. With the first compressor, you just want to kind of level out the dynamics even more in general. So this means you want it to be constantly engaging and disengaging, working hard to just bring down those louder syllables and bring up, not technically, but to bring up those quieter syllables and quieter words. So this means you're going to want a low ratio because it's constantly engaging. And you want to adjust the threshold until you're seeing 2 to 10 dB of gain reduction. And that's just a very broad starting point there. 2 dB is kind of this end of that range you want to be on for lighter genres, even a lot of mainstream music. But mainstream, we're getting closer to 4 or 5. And then up towards that 10 dB area is heavy rock music, or just rock music in general, hardcore music, that kind of stuff. But this is why the threshold is important, because you want to put in that low ratio because it's going to be constantly engaging and disengaging. So we don't want it to clamp down really aggressively because it's always clamping down, every couple of words or even syllables. And then you want to adjust the threshold until you're seeing the desired amount of gain reduction. And that's how you go about setting this. So now the other settings that we need to think about, attack time. And that dictates how much aggression you're dialing in on the compressor. So think of attack time kind of as attack amount. And slower attack times result in more aggressive sound because you're not clamping down on the transient. The onset of the words are getting through. So it sounds more aggressive. It sticks out in the mix more. If you use a fast attack time, it clamps down on those consonants, those transients, the beginnings of words. And this makes the vocal sound thick. And sometimes that's desirable. It makes it sound thick and heavy, but it also puts it further back in the mix. So generally with vocals, you want to opt for a slower time to help them cut through. Because if you're processing the lead vocal, is what we're really focusing on here, you want it to cut through. You want it to be right at the front of the mix. So you want to opt for slower attack times. And that's going to give you the kind of aggression and excitement that comes from slow attack times. And also it's going to help the vocal to stay on top. Now for release time, you want it to be kind of medium to slow. Just avoid using really fast release times because you're getting into dangerous territory there. So instead just opt for medium to slow release times. Always err on the side of caution, as in, always go slower than you think necessary. And the aim here really is you want to adjust the release time. So start with medium to slow and then adjust that until it's recessing to near 0 every few words. Because if it's too slow, the compressor doesn't relax between the words and relax between the syllables. So you need to speed that up a bit. So just make sure it's recessing or getting near 0 every few words. So now that we've applied some compression to get the consistency there, and we've removed the ugly frequencies earlier on in the preparation phase, we can now rein in the tone a bit more. And again, just to reiterate the importance of recording, you get the tone you want in the recording phase. Here, we're just kind of subtly nudging it into the right direction. So we've already removed those nasty elements. And that's why I like to have these 2 separate phases of EQ, because you do that earlier in the prep phase. And by this point, you forgot about that. It sounds clean. It's good to go. So now you can just focus on improving the tone. Now, this is where having an intention is vital. So what I mean by that is you want to sit down and listen to your vocal and think, right, okay, what does it need? What is the issue here? What needs fixing? What needs exaggerating? Do I want it to sound brighter? Do I want it to sound warmer? Does it sound thin? Do I need to fix that? Does it sound harsh? Do I need to fix that? Have an intention first. Don't just grab an EQ and move it around and just try loads of stuff and see what happens. And that's what you want to do here, is avoid that see what happens attitude. Because if you set out to just see what happens and that's your intention, you're going to achieve that intention. You're going to find out what happens, but that's all you're going to find out. You're not going to take a step closer to your kind of larger vision for this mix or to a better mix. All you're going to do is just think, oh, okay, that happened. And that's not what we want here. What we want is to have an intention and then figure out how to go about achieving that intention. So to give you an example, if the vocal sounds dull and boring, you need to fix that. So if it's sounding dull, you need to enhance the upper mids probably in the top end. If it's sounding boring, again, you just want to increase the excitement in the upper mid range to really bring out the aggression in the voice. But then equally, if the vocal sounds harsh, then you need to reduce those upper mid frequencies, that kind of grating area of the frequency spectrum. So you think about what you want to achieve, and then you think about how you set out to do it. And if you're struggling to have an intention, then using a reference helps. And what I mean by that is pull in a professional tracks and compare your mix to them repeatedly and just listen to the vocals on a professional release that's in a similar genre and just think, okay, how does it sound? Listen to yours and compare. Does your vocal sound thin in comparison? Does it sound dull? Does it need a lot more top end? Does it need less bottom end? On the kind of other way of thinking about that. So if you're struggling to have an intention, using a reference will help. And something else to consider here is that tone changes with genre. So depending on what style you're working in, you'll probably want a different tone on the vocal. To give you an example, a lot of mainstream genres will have a much brighter sound on the vocal. There'll be a lot more air in the vocal. It will sound more expensive. Whereas rock music and those kind of genres, there's less top end because we don't want it to sound as polished. We don't want it to sound as expensive or have as much sheen. We want to sound kind of gritty. So then you're going to maybe enhance the upper mids more than the very top end. So just bear in mind that tone changes with genre. And this is why I think it's important to use references in a similar genre, because that's going to help you to make stylistic decisions that are appropriate for the style of music you're working with. So now for the kind of actual application of this. In general, you want to keep it subtle and wide because it's really easy to hear over-processing on vocals. We hear vocals, or at least voices, all the time. Whenever you're speaking to someone, you're listening to my voice right now, you're just so used to hearing voices every day. So as soon as you notice a song where the vocal has been really processed, it's obvious because you're just so used to hearing natural, subtle vocals. So in general, you want to keep it wide, as in wide bands. And I don't mean super wide. I just mean, try not to apply any really narrow boosts or cuts. With cuts, you can definitely be a bit more liberal, especially with those notches to remove the room resonances that we talked about earlier. But you want to be careful with narrow boosts, and it does work sometimes. But generally, just kind of if you're not really sure, just err on the side of caution and go wide bandwidth and keep it subtle. So 2-3 dB is normally all you need on a vocal part just to nudge it in the right direction. Now, in this case, you do not want to use the solo button. So earlier with surgical EQ, use the solo button, that's fine. But now we're mixing. We're in the kind of the midst of a mix. We're excited. We're listening on our main monitors, flicking between different headphones maybe. We're kind of in the zone. So this is where you don't want to use the solo button. If you're really struggling with this, and you're applying EQ to the vocal, but you kind of can't hear what's going on, then first of all, just try turning the vocal up or turn everything else down. And this means you're still getting the context of the entire mix, but it will be easier to hear the EQ changes that you're making. Or if you're really struggling, at least double check in context. So what I mean by this is if you really struggle to hear the EQ changes when the vocal is not soloed, and you're listening to the whole mix with the vocal on top, what you can do instead is, first of all, find that intention. So think, okay, what does the vocal need? It needs to sound less harsh, for example. And then you solo the vocal, you treat it because you had that intention. So you just find when that harshness is, you notch it out, but then you check it in the context of the mix and you bypass it a few times and you kind of fine tune it in the context of the mix. So that's only if you're really struggling. If you can avoid that, please do. Just avoid the solo button as much as you can. Now, just to kind of a few guidelines here of how I generally approach EQ on vocals. Usually some kind of high shelf boost is needed. And what I've started doing in the last year or two is actually applying a high shelf boost on the mix bus, on the entire mix. So I don't have to boost the vocals as much because I'm already getting a lot of top end from that. But if you're not doing that, generally you do need some kind of high shelf boost. And that just means you're boosting everything above a certain frequency. So if you set a high shelf at plus 3 dB at 8 kilohertz, for example, that means it's boosting everything above 8 kilohertz by 3 dB. So that's normally needed to make your vocal sound expensive, to add that air that you need for it to sound modern. The microphone you're using probably isn't a boutique, $1,000+ microphone. It's probably a more affordable mic. And to get that kind of expensive microphone sound, you have to boost the top end a bit because that's the kind of characteristics that those boutique mics have. So sometimes this can be as low as 8 kilohertz. Rarely, if it's a really dull sounding vocal, you can go as low as 8 kilohertz or even lower. There's no rules, just a kind of guideline there. But usually it's higher, maybe 10 kilohertz, 12 kilohertz. Just start at 15 with maybe +3 dB, and just pull the shelf down until you start to notice it gets harsh and like tinny and kind of not nice. And then bring it back up until you get into this spot where it's adding this air and expensiveness that you want without making the vocal sound harsh. So then, in addition to that, generally some kind of high pass filter is needed to tighten up the low end, or by removing a lot of the low end, you can help the vocal to cut through in the mix. So how you approach this is engage a high pass filter at maybe 50 hertz, and then just sweep it up. And again, not in solo, in the context of the mix, sweep that up. So from 50 hertz to 60 to 80 to 100, etc., until you start to notice that the vocal starts to lose its warmth, lose its thickness in its body. And then you know you've gone too far. So then you can back it off. And generally as well, if vocals were recorded at home, they sound kind of muddy. It's just a combination of things that generally muddiness around 200 to 500 hertz needs addressing. So just something else to consider there, just kind of subtly cutting that frequency range out. I find pretty much works all the time, even if it's just a really wide 1 dB cut, if that. Sometimes you have to be more aggressive, but for me, that's just seems like such a common move that I'm applying. And then finally, another thing that I find myself doing over and over again is applying boosts in the upper mids to help the vocal cut through, especially in denser mixes. If the vocal's not cutting through and kind of getting lost in the track, adding some boosts in the upper mids will really help the vocal to cut through. So just some kind of guidelines there. Hopefully everyone's still with me. Like I said, it would be moving fast, and we're already at nearly an hour already. So I'm going to try and push through this, but we're getting towards the end of the signal chain now. So the next compressor, and this is in some ways less important, but what we're doing here is applying incremental compression. So rather than getting one compressor to do all the heavy lifting, we're applying 2 or maybe even 3 compressors, each doing a bit of the work. So with the last compressor, we improved the tone and smoothed out the dynamics. But this time you want to catch the louder peak. So again, this is optional, but if you want to just add even more control, this time try catching the louder peak. So this means you'll need a higher ratio and a higher threshold and a faster attack time to catch those transients. So you just want to see the compressor clamping down on the louder peaks, maybe every few words or every few phases. Similar amount of gain reduction. And again, this is optional. And in fact, to go back to that plugin order kind of disclaimer there, this often works best before the first compressor. So I don't generally think of it until this point, which is why it's here. But quite often it works best if you have this kind of faster peak compression before the slower tonal compression. So after that, saturation. And if you've not used saturation before, the reason why this is important a lot of the time, again, optional, but a lot of the time it just kind of brings the excitement and adds that top air that you need to a vocal, because EQ can only enhance what's already there. Equalizing the top end isn't introducing new frequencies. You're just boosting the stuff that's already there, right? Whereas saturation or distortion, overdrive, whatever you want to call it, actually introduces new harmonics. And that's the key here. So if you want to try this out, a lot of DAWs don't have great saturation plugins in. A lot of them do have some kind. Logic actually has quite a good one, but a lot of them you don't have as much control as you might want. So the Klanghelm IVGI is a great little free plugin. I've got a link here if I just load this up. Hopefully this one works. So let me know if you can see that okay. Again, I just recommend you kind of bookmark that page. Don't worry about it too much now, but just wanted to share that link with you because this is a great free plugin for applying saturation to the vocals because you can control the tone. And that's the main thing that's important here, because how you adjust that tone knob is going to dictate what you're getting out of this. So you just want to really subtly add a bit of saturation. You don't want it to be noticeable. Again, don't do this in solo. Just bring up the amount of saturation until you kind of notice it, and then back it off a bit. And then you change the tone to either add warmth, and this is by exaggerating the low frequency. So on that free Klanghelm one, you go to the response knob, and there's kind of a control there, or on the left it's low frequency, on the right it's high frequency. And that's kind of the standard way for saturation plugins to work. So if you saturate the low frequencies, it's going to add warmth. If you saturate the high frequencies, it's going to add excitement and brightness. And generally this is the approach I find myself using far more with lead vocals, is saturating the top end to add more excitement and more brightness. Really subtly though, just to make that clear, very, very subtle, hardly noticeable, just to add a bit more excitement. Now you can use this as an effect, so you can, turn the saturation or the drive all the way up, so that you're really kind of clearly hearing distorted vocals. And then this is really cool to use as a spot effect, so just an effect on certain phrases or certain sections, just to add interest. And we're going to talk about this a bit more in the slide on automation. But you can just automate the plugin bypass. So load up this saturation plugin, do it, adjust it so it sounds really distorted, and then find the section that you want this kind of distorted vocal sound on, and just automate the plugin so it comes on for that one section, that one phrase, that one word, whatever it is. So that's saturation. Moving on now to limiting. So some people do this a lot. Personally, I only do it every now and then if I feel it really needs it. But the general idea here is that you can use a limiter, which is just a really kind of heavy form of compression, where you set the threshold and the audio just won't go above that threshold. So it's like a compressor with an infinite ratio. As soon as the audio hits that threshold, it stays there. So if it's minus 1 dB, for example, the audio never goes above minus 1 dB. So you can use a limiter to catch any peaks that have somehow made it through automation, made it through your two compressors potentially. And now you just want to catch those loud peaks. So you only really want 2 or 3 dB of gain reduction infrequently. So again, just the loudest peaks, maybe once every few phrases, or once a verse, once a chorus, just to catch anything that somehow made its way through, just again to add another layer of control. So now the vocals pretty much mix in terms of tone and dynamics. It's sounding good. So it's time to add some space and some interest with effects. So first of all, we've got reverb and delay. Now, the aim here is to really create some space around the vocal without putting it back in the mix. And this is the caveat here. A lot of people, when they start out, are far too liberal with reverb. They use far too much reverb, and they use it on everything. And this is a mistake, because reverb, especially on the lead vocal, is going to have the effects of putting it further back in the mix, putting it away from the listener. So generally, you don't want to do that. You want to find a way to create space without putting it back in the mix. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But also what you're trying to do here is add some stereo width to the vocal, because it's a mono thing. A lead vocal part is mono. So we want to add some stereo width just to add some more excitement, make it sound a bit larger than life. So if you are using reverb, opt for shorter decay time, so some really small room, or plate reverb, which is generally a really short time, and use a pre-delay. 30 milliseconds or more, because what this does is it separates the reverb from the vocal, and this kind of in your brain triggers a thing where you kind of hear them separately. It moves the reverb out the way of the transient of the vocal, so that onset hasn't got reverb on it, so it cuts through the mix more, but it also just creates this kind of psychoacoustic separation, to throw some big words out there. So that's just a good little trick using pre-delay, but just always opt for shorter decay times on the vocal if you are going to use reverb, and try and keep it really subtle. But the thing is here, delay is more commonly used to create space around the vocal. It is changing. I'm more and more hearing stuff on the radio where there is reverb on the vocal, maybe just for certain phrases or sections, there's just this epic reverb sound. But in general, delay is a more common way of creating space around the vocal. And how you do this is by applying a stereo slapback delay with different times on the right and left. So having different times on the right and left, that creates stereo width, but it also creates this kind of pretend acoustic space, because this is what we hear. It's like an echo. When we're in a space, we hear we hear the vocal bouncing off the walls. So this replicates a space, but without that reverb tail that muddies up the mix and puts the vocal further back. So this is the best way. And again, it only needs to be subtle, just to add some kind of sense of space around the vocal. And this will keep the vocals nice and upfront and in your face. And then generally as well, especially in mainstream genres, some kind of mono time delay. So just a delay straight down the middle in mono, time to a quarter note, just kind of tucked underneath. And this just adds some depth and some interest. So now we've added some space, the vocal sounding great. You've done everything, hopefully not in solo, so you have kind of mixed the vocal in the context of the mix. But now what we can do is actually try and create a bit more space in the mix for the vocal. So you may have heard the term frequency slotting before, but I actually prefer to call this technique range allocation. And this is simply the act of allocating a frequency range to a specific instrument. So it doesn't just apply to vocals, it applies to everything. If you boost 2 kilohertz, for example, on the snare, it's probably not a good idea to boost that same frequency range on the vocal, right? Because they're now competing for that space. So if you boost 2 kilohertz on the snare, you kind of allocate that range to the snare. Now, we're talking about vocals here. So the way you think about this is, what frequencies did you boost on the vocal? Another way you can think about this is, where is the vocal most prominent? So where's the kind of most exciting part of the vocal? What frequency range is that? But the quickest, easiest way is just to open up your tonal EQ and look at what frequencies you boosted. And then you just cut those frequencies in competing instruments. In a rock band setup, competing instruments will be guitars, snares, pianos, even the bass guitar. So if anything's kind of battling the vocal for this space, try cutting those frequencies that you're boosting in the vocal, and that will just kind of give the vocal a nice little pocket. And keep it subtle. This is why I don't like the term slotting, because slotting sounds aggressive, but you're not aggressively doing this. You're just using a kind of wide, subtle, maybe 2-3 dB boost on the guitar, for example, in these areas where you boosted the vocal. So now automation, and way back, the first step was also automation, gain automation though, and that was getting consistent levels before compression. But now there's more ways we can add automation, and so many people, when they're learning, they completely overlook automation, but it's such a crucial part. It takes time, it does take time, but the vocal is, the main thing that you're going to be automating. So it's worth spending time here. And there's a few ways you can use some further automation to really take your vocals to that next level. First of all, you can apply more volume automation. So you can do this on the fader now. So we had gain automation, which was before compression, and you either did that using clip gain, or maybe you automated the vocal on the channel, but then sent that to a new channel where you applied all your processing. Either way, now at the end of the chain, you can automate the vocal. And this will just be because maybe certain sections are too loud. If the vocal's super consistent now, but the music's quite dynamic, so the verses are quieter, suddenly the vocal might be too loud in verses, so you just have to bring down entire verses. You can enhance emotion by really pulling out the ends and beginnings of words. So just, like a 5 dB boost as a vocalist trails off at the end of a phrase can really bring out the emotion of that trailing off, those kind of breathy parts. And you can also enhance the rhythm. So if it's rapping, you could just add some small boosts on the beat, for example, to emphasize certain syllables or words that are important in kind of the flow of the rhythm. You can use effect automation as well to automate the delay. So the delay maybe gets louder at the end of certain verses or choruses. That's really common, just on the last word. Spot effects, like saturation we spoke about earlier, or that kind of telephone sound, maybe just on single phrases, single verses, that kind of stuff. Reverb throws, another cool way, just the last word of a verse or something before a gap, or the chorus, anything like that. If there's a gap in the vocal, you can just throw it to a reverb, a really long reverb, maybe with like a 5-second decay time, and just send the last word of the phrase to that, and it creates this kind of epic sound on that last word. And you might also find that you need to automate the EQ. So if different sections need different treatment, don't be afraid to do that. If the vocalist is singing falsetto, for example, just in one section, and suddenly in that section they sound really weak and thin because they're using the head voice, they're singing really high, maybe you just need to either move that onto its own channel, or just bring in some EQ automation where it's just another EQ plugin that just is bypassed for most of the song, but then comes in on this section. So a lot to cover there. Hopefully it wasn't too overwhelming, but I just wanted to give you a really kind of solid overview of the entire process, because I think that's what's important here. And of course, some of these steps are more important than others. So let's go through now and just recap and talk about which ones are the most important. So gain automation, this is essential. This is where you get those levels of dynamic consistency you need. Gain staging, also important, just to make sure you've got headroom. Surgical EQ, not kind of the most vital one, but just cleans up the vocal a bit. De-essing, important if you're noticing sibilance is an issue. Compressor number 1, generally needed. It's rare that I won't use some kind of compression on vocals. And this time it's just kind of tonal compression, and then tonal EQ. So this is the main EQ where we're just nudging the vocal in the right direction, enhancing any pleasing elements, just kind of getting the sound we want. Then compressor number 2, which, isn't the most important one, but if you want even more consistency for mainstream styles of music, a second compressor will help you to get that. Saturation, just a nice little way to add a bit more excitement and top end to the vocal. Limiting, if you really feel like you need another layer of dynamic control. Reverb delay, pretty essential just for creating some space. Frequency slotting or range allocation, just a nice little way to create some more space around the vocal. And finally, automation, which is important in mainstream genres or genres where you need heavy processing, like electronic, pop, that kind of stuff, where the vocal needs to be constantly exciting and engaging. And you can automate these effects. So those are the 12 steps. Complete kind of bird's eye view of that process. Go away and implement this stuff. Make sure you download those slides to recap this. Now, I'm not sure why you showed up here today. Maybe you aren't happy with your current mixes. Maybe your mixes still sound like they were recorded in a bedroom. Or it could just be that you aren't satisfied with your current fan base. And perhaps you just want a larger audience to help you make a living from your music. But making change, no matter how big or small, is never easy. And it is hard to make your vocals and mixes sound studio quality. Even basic tools like EQ and compression are difficult to master. And I know all of this because I've been there. I've been through all of this. But even worse, though, than all of these challenges are the negative thoughts and doubts that begin creeping in. And if you've ever heard yourself saying, I don't know the first thing about processing vocals, I'm completely lost and I have no idea where to start, it's okay, because that's totally normal. Everyone goes through that. And I understand what it's like to have those doubts. So maybe you've been doing this for a while, maybe you're a beginner, but either way, I can still remember how daunting it all seems. And it's not a nice feeling. But with all that being said, I do have some good news. You can change your situation. You are in complete control of your career as a musician or engineer. Let's just take a second to look at the facts. Every year, musicians are producing hit albums and singles in their own homes. And it's never been easier to produce great music at home and grow a fan base independently. But I didn't say it was easy. I just said it's never been easier. And that's why now is such a great time to be thinking about committing to home recording. Just take a second to imagine what it'd be like to be able to produce mixes that are relatable, professional, and radio ready in the comfort of your own home. This is the opportunity that we have today with home recording. And this is the reason why I'm so passionate about this work. So I wanted this free training series to be better than many paid courses out there. And hopefully by now you should understand the importance of vocals in all of this. Because focusing on the vocals is the fastest way to take your mixes to the next level, so you can finally feel confident in your work, impress your friends and family, find your true fans, and get the recognition you deserve. This is exactly why I created an in-depth vocal production masterclass called Produce Pro Vocals. And many of you will already be familiar with this. So if you don't feel confident enough to share your recordings yet, or you've been doing this a while but want to take your mixes to the next level and start growing your fan base, or if you're already a professional musician and you just want to improve the quality of your work, or if you just aren't sure where to get started with vocal recording and mixing, Produce Pro Vocals can help you. Essentially, it's the world's best online program for learning how to record and mix professional radio-worthy vocals, and it's ideal for people who want to produce better music and mixes at home. There's nothing else out there like this that's designed for musicians who record at home. So if that's you, this is made for you. Inside, you'll learn what you need to prepare before recording day, how to find the right microphone and get the best sound at the source, how to get the absolute best performance out of any vocalist, the proper techniques for subtly editing the vocal to perfection. Using compression and EQ to make your vocal sound expensive and radio ready. How to use effects to make your mixes sound modern and full of character. And of course, so much more. If you're an aspiring musician who records at home, Produce Pro Vocals is for you. But who is it not for? Well, it's not for people who want to learn about working in a professional recording studio, and it's not for people who are already working engineers. And it's not for people who aren't 100% committed to producing better music and mixes at home. If the commitment isn't there, then this is not the right program for you, and I ask that you please do not sign up. So how does the program work? Well, it's a step-by-step course that takes you through the entire vocal production process, from recording preparation to finished mix, absolutely everything. And everything that you've seen so far, for example, this workshop, the videos that I shared with you last week, that's all like an extract from a book, just a brief overview or a chapter here and there. Whereas the course is like the full book. Everything is ordered and structured. We go into much more depth, and all the missing gaps are filled. Each lesson is delivered in a mixture of text and video, and there's just over 5 hours of video and content in total, demonstrating each technique along the way. And that's the key thing here. Everything's hosted in a member's website, and you get 24/7 access for the rest of your life. So there are a load of complementary resources as well to help you implement what you learn, like cheat sheets, checklists, templates, multi-tracks, a private Facebook group, and much more. So let me just give you a really quick tour now for anyone that's interested. So this is the members area. I know some of you watching here will already be members of the membership program, so this will be familiar to you. But this is your overview, and just to give you a kind of quick view of the curriculum. So this is all the lessons you're going to get, concise as possible. So this is really the fastest way to learn all of this stuff. You can see here, it's complete. It's not just extracts here and there. And then you've got some cool resources as well here. Some cheat sheets, that kind of stuff, multi-tracks to practice on, DAW templates, which you're actually all getting here live anyway. And you can download the video. So that's the members area. Now, I know it can be hard to trust somebody online who you've never met. So I'll just quickly give you a few examples of what people are saying about the course inside the private Facebook group. So Garth said, "Thank you so much. My mix is already improving tremendously. I enjoy all of the courses and they are very helpful. They are all helpful, rather." Fernando says, "Rob is doing a really great job with this course. I like the way he teaches and the stuff. He cares a lot about us as students and he's always there if we need him." Greg said, "Oh, thank you, Rob, for the chest and above mic experimentation and tilting towards the mouth, stellar." So just a few quick examples there. Now, you might be wondering, how long will all this take? Time is the most valuable resource you have, especially if you have full-time commitments outside of music, which I know many of you do. So I can understand why you might be wondering if you have enough time to fully participate in Produce Pro Vocals and get everything you possibly can out of it. The good news is, once you register, the course is available 24/7 for the rest of your life. So you're able to learn when it's most convenient for you. That means if something comes up and you can't log in for a few days or even a couple of weeks, it's not a problem. You just pick up where you left off. The course is designed to save you time. Think about it. How long would it take you to figure this stuff out on your own? Because it took me several years. And I want to pass that experience on to you in the span of just a few hours. So if you still aren't 100% sure, you can give the course a try for 30 days risk-free with my only pay if you love it guarantee. So the risk is on me, not you. Now, if you were to hire me at my hourly rate and purchase all of the bonuses separately, this course would cost you $917. And that's really not much compared to what you would pay for a professional mix. If all this did was help you to reach your dream of producing great music or making a living from your talent, would it be worth it? If all this did was help you to avoid months of frustration and experimentation, would it be worth it? Of course, I'm not going to charge you $917. The investment for Produce Pro Vocals is $199. You can either pay in full or take advantage of our payment plan. Now, as you consider joining us, I want you to think about the cost of studying audio at college or university. And after that, consider the amount of time it would take you to figure this stuff out on your own. What would be different in your life 6 months from now if you decided not to commit to improving the quality of your music and mixes? Probably nothing, right? Everything would be exactly the same as it is now. So to make the progress you want in your life, you've got to break your old habits. The way you're going to do that is by investing in this program. I'm going to walk you through step by step the process of recording and mixing studio quality vocals at home. And if you follow what I'm going to show you, you will make quick progress. That's why I guarantee it with that generous refund policy. Now, in addition to the main production course, vocal production course, I'm also going to include a free bonus course. And this is the advanced vocal mixing course, where you'll learn things like opening up a whole new world of options with parallel processing, adding emotion with automation, making rhythmic vocals more powerful, using sidechain compression to free up space in the mix, using multiband compression, and finally the filter referencing technique that will instantly reveal any flaws in your vocal. So that's included too. And this advanced course will help you to go further than 99% of the home studio owners out there, so you can feel confident and in control of every single mix. I've taught over 500,000 people about home recording, and tens of thousands of people have even paid me to help with their music. And I'm lucky to be in that position. And I can tell you from experience that the first step to success is choosing to invest in yourself and your own skills. I see it time and time again. Those who commit come out on top. Now, the registration period will be closing on Friday at midnight Pacific time. We do this so that we can cater to all the new students coming through. And once the registration period is complete, I can make myself available to support you. So the deadline to register is this Friday. And as you make to look a decision, just know this. If you're feeling overwhelmed with the amount of knowledge that is required, or you're struggling to produce studio quality music at home, it's okay. That's totally normal. The challenging part for most of us is that we try to manage all of this in addition to all the other responsibilities we have in our lives. Because life is an ongoing competition for your time and attention. And it's a competition that you rarely win. Ask yourself this: what is important in your life right now? What do you want to achieve in the months ahead? What goals do you have related to your music or mixes that keep getting pushed back to the back burner? You have an opportunity to do something about that right now, today. Maybe you think you aren't good enough for this, that it won't be possible for you, but that's simply not true. The problem is that the professional studios want you to think that you need them to produce great music, that your room isn't good enough to produce high quality mixes. In fact, the entire industry want you to think that. But don't listen to them, because it is a complete lie. And in fact, as you can see, it's no real surprise that you're struggling. But it's not your fault, because like the music industry, the audio industry is changing and has been for many years. More and more chart-topping music is being produced in bedrooms, hotel rooms, living rooms, and other non-professional spaces. And Produce Pro Vocals is a program that I know can transform your mixes. So if this video series resonates with you, or this workshop today has resonated with you, then I invite you to say yes. Yes to studio quality home recordings. Yes to complete confidence and control of your music and mixes. Yes to an adoring fan base that love everything you do. Yes to the freedom and joy that comes from doing something you love. Let this be the first step towards your number one goals as a musician. And I look forward to being your guide along the way. Now, I do have some exciting news, and I shared this with you briefly earlier. So I've added a special bonus, in fact, 2 bonuses for all of you that are watching right now. So if you join within the next hour, you'll get 2 additional bonuses for free. The first bonus you're going to get is my Audio 101 course. And in this course, which is perfect for beginners, you're going to learn all the basics of audio in under an hour. And people normally spend months kind of flailing around with this stuff, really figuring it out. But you're going to learn all the basics in under an hour. And this is the perfect prequel to the full Produce Pro Vocals course. So for anyone that thinks, am I ready for this course? I've only really just got started. Well, this is for you. This is to help you get up to that level that you need to be to really get the most out of the course. So even if you've been doing this for a while, it will also help you to recap the basics and fill any gaps and avoid confusion. Because it's important to walk before you can run. You need to have a solid foundation before moving on. And that's why I wanted to throw this bonus in there. And then the second bonus you're going to get if you join now within the next hour is my Mixing with Saturation workshop. And we briefly touched on this today, but saturation is such an essential tool for taking your mixes to the next level. When you're at that point where your mixes are sounding great and you really want to take them to studio professional standards. Of course, inside Produce Pro Vocals, saturation on vocals specifically is covered. But in this exclusive bonus, which is a replay of a private live workshop, you'll learn how to add character, excitement, and warmth to your entire mixes. So this is about using saturation, not just on vocals, but in several cases throughout your mixes. And in fact, you're going to learn 4 specific ways to use saturation to take your mixes to the next level. Now, this bonus is perfect for people who are ready to up their game and learn how to mix like a true professional. So they're the 2 bonuses. To clarify, you only get these 2 bonuses for free if you act now. So if you're a beginner and you want to avoid wasting time on the basics, or if you're ready to take your mixes to the next level with saturation, so you can really impress your fans and feel great about your work, join Produce Pro Vocals within the next hour to get these 3 exclusive bonuses. To recap, here's everything you'll get when you join right now. You'll get the full curriculum, the main Produce Pro Vocals course. You'll get the multi-tracks and the other resources like the cheat sheets, the checklists, the templates. You'll get access to the private Facebook community where you can get feedback on your work and just make new friends, just interact with people, ask any questions. You get the advanced vocal mixing course. You'll get the Audio 101 free bonus, which is perfect for beginners to cover all the basics in under an hour. And you'll also get the mixing with saturation workshop again as a bonus. So to recap, the investment is $199. There's a 30-day refund policy in case you aren't happy. So if you're on the fence, give it a go risk-free, then decide if you want to stick around. Now, I'm just going to load up the button here for you to join. And this is the link you need to follow if you want to get those bonuses. So let me know if that works, everyone. If you hit the join now button, you'll be taken to a page. So if you're ready to join us, click that button if you want to take that next step. And you'll be taken to a secure order form to fill in your details. After that, you'll get immediate access to the private website with all of the material, all the bonuses. Absolutely everything is there, ready and waiting for you to dive in straight away. So you can get started seconds from now. I invite you to take this new accelerated path to incredible mixes and adoring fans, the path without years of wasted time. So thank you for watching. I'm now going to skip back over to the cam to do some Q&A. So let's head back over. So hopefully you can all see me now. Let me know if anyone has any issues with that button, because I know there was an issue earlier. But you should see on that page all of the bonuses lined up. You can pay by PayPal, you can pay by a payment plan, you can get access for only $59 today. So if anyone has any questions specifically about the workshop, please feel free to ask. What I'm also going to do now, just while that hour ticks down, so be sure to join in that hour if you want those bonuses. While I'm waiting for that, I'm going to answer your questions. So if you've got anything specific that you're struggling with, ask right here, right now, and I'll do my best to help you with it. I can see we've got some questions here already. Good to go. So I'm going to work through these first. But anything at all, click the speech bubble, change your kind of chat type to question, and that flags it up. It would just be easier for me to see that. And what we're going to do now is try and help everyone out. So first question, a couple of things about the templates. What do you think of denoise processing, iZotope, etc.? Would you ever use it? And if so, where in the chain? So can I flag this question up? Okay. So what do I think of denoise processing? Well, I think it's putting it's essentially putting a plaster over it instead of addressing the root of the issue. This is an issue that you need to address really in the recording phase. And this may seem like a cop-out, like a kind of a, not the answer you're looking for perhaps, but really with noise and working with noise, it's all about removing it at the source. First of all, removing it in the room, finding a quiet room to recording, then removing it with mic placement, so pointing a cardioid mic away from any noise sources, for example. And then it's about checking there's no noise coming from your preamp, your cables, all that kind of stuff. Now, if you're in a case where you're in a tight spot and you've got a noisy recording that you're stuck with, maybe the performance was great, maybe the musicians or someone else you've recorded in, they can't record again. Whatever reason, if you are stuck with something that's noisy, then yeah, give it a go. A lot of the time, you can kind of bury it in the mix. If it's not ridiculously noisy, you can use some gating or some downward expansion. If you look into those, just to cut out the noise between sections. So if it's just a noisy guitar, which is common, and maybe in the introduction, it's really noisy, because it's just vocals maybe. And you can hear it, but then as soon as the full mix comes in, that noise gets lost. What you can do is you can either automate the noise out in those emptier sections, or just use a gate to get rid of that automated. If you are in a really tight spot and you need to remove the noise, then iZotope is a great option. Just try and be subtle with it. Like, they always introduce artifacts. So if you can do anything at all to avoid using denoise processing, do it. If you're in a tight spot, I think it's worth using a tool like iZotope that's good. Something like Audacity has noise removal, and it's horrific. It's awful. Definitely don't use that. So if you're in a tight spot, yes, but generally worth avoiding. Okay, so that was a question from Michael. Peter says, how can you bring your touch to a mix? How do you find your touch? That's an interesting question, because I actually think that you shouldn't have a touch. And what I'm going to assume you mean by touch is like a style, like a sound, right? But I think that you shouldn't kind of impart yourself on the music as a mix engineer. If it's your own music that you're mixing, then that's great. Find a style that works for you, and you just find that by trying different things. And just with time, you'll develop your own kind of ways of approaching things, how to get interesting sounds, especially if you're working with your own music. Over time, you will just develop your own sound. So that will come with time. But if you're talking about this as a mix engineer, Peter, then I think you shouldn't have a sound. A lot of mix engineers do, and rock music, something like that, people love Chris Lord-Alge. He has kind of a signature sound, but at the same time, you just want to do what's right for the music. Don't bring your ego into it. If you're mixing someone else's music, it's about them. It's not about you. Maybe they come to you because they like the sound of your other stuff, and that's great. But don't try and have a sonic footprint. I just think you should do what's best for the individual track. Naturally, you will have your own kind of sonic footprint just from the plugins you use, the techniques you use, etc. But I don't think you should ever try to force it. Michael asked, what is the amount of overlap with Musician on a Mission, if any? So this is very relevant to anyone else here that's watching who is part of the membership program, the Musician on a Mission membership program, who's interested in joining Produce Pro Vocals. I've had a couple of questions about this. So think of it this way. The membership program is an ongoing thing. It's ongoing development. It's a bigger picture thing. So you already know this from the range of topics that are covered in that. Every week we go deep into one topic, but it's kind of a new topic every week. And we're just trying to build the bigger picture and kind of create this ongoing progress. Whereas this course, first of all, it's a different way of learning. It's instant. So you dive in. If you wanted, you could sit down for a few hours and go through the whole course straight away. It's all there, ready and waiting. And this is better for something specific like vocal production, because it is just a very specific thing. It's one part of the mix. It's such an important part, but it's just one thing. And it does have this knock-on effect, but because it's specific, it's more suited to a course where you go through, you learn it, you apply it as you're going, you come out the other side after a few hours, and you're just incredible at producing vocals at home. So to answer your question, Michael, there's not too much overlap. Vocals will be covered in the membership program. But of course, not in anywhere near as much depth as this course. This is what the course is about. It's about depth and going really deep into vocal production. So they're complementary. If you are a member, this is highly complementary to the program, because like I said, it will have a knock-on effect, and it is going to be a very quick kind of improvement. So that was Michael. So keep the questions coming. I've got quite a lot here to work through. And just a reminder there, those bonuses are only available if you join within the next hour. So if you want that Audio 101 course, if you're a beginner and you really want to get to grasp with the basics, or if you're ready to take your mixes to the next level with saturation, which is such an incredible tool, then join within the next hour, because those bonuses are going to disappear. So Adam says, what is your opinion on mixing in mono? I mix in mono for most of the mix. I think it's an incredible technique. To give you an idea, I will be in mono right up until the point where I start playing with effects, which for me is quite far down the line. So EQ, compression, volume balancing, even just small things like processing the kick drum, those kind of stuff, I'm doing all in mono. The bulk of the mix is in mono, and then at the end, when I'm at a point, okay, I'm ready to start processing the vocal and adding reverb and delay, or I'm ready to start getting my reverb sends right and creating a nice reverb balance, creating some space in the whole mix, those kind of things. That's when you need to be in stereo, right? Because you're working with stereo effects. So for me, that's generally the point where I go, okay, I'll spend 5 minutes, not long at all, panning, because I really don't think panning is that important, as in separation. All the kind of good qualities of a mix don't usually come from panning. They come from your use of EQ and balancing. So mixing in mono helps you to focus on those things rather than compensating for them by just panning things left and right. So I mix in mono for most of the mix, and especially with EQ, I think this is very helpful. Celeste asked, how do you suggest treating my critical listening environment when it's my bedroom? That's a great question. So my main piece of advice is to take the time to build acoustic panels. It doesn't have to cost a lot. You can do it for under $100, £100, €100, wherever you are. You can build your own panels, and there's plenty of guides online how to do that. And then it means you can move them around. So you can put them on mic stands. You can hang them on the wall. If it's a bedroom and you don't want to have it up permanently, you could chuck it under your bed. And when it comes time to mix, just put up on mic stands. When it comes time to record vocals, move it around so it's optimized for recording. Other than that, if you don't have the time or the money to build your own panels, of course, you can also use DIY, guerrilla treatment, which we kind of touched on here. So mattresses, that kind of stuff. Again, if it's a bedroom and it's kind of multi-purpose, it is difficult. First of all, just try and have more soft furnishings in there just to kill the reverb a bit. That's going to help. Definitely reference on headphones a lot and constantly flick between headphones and your monitors. That's going to help to counteract the negatives of having a bad acoustic environment. But if you have the time and the money, definitely build panels. Shannon asked, is the Waves Vocal Rider plugin useful for gain automation? I've never used it. I've heard good things. I just don't like doing it that way, because when I'm automating the vocal, it's not as much as it's a case of getting that consistency. It's deeper than that, because certain words will sound different. They might have the same apparent volume. They might both be minus 10 dB, but maybe one's like really low like this, and the other one's really high pitched like this. That high pitched one could be the same volume, but it's going to cut through the mix so much more. That's just one small example of things that any kind of automated automation, so any kind of vocal rider effect, where it goes through and it manually kind of looks forward and figures that out for you. Anything like that, it can't take those more subjective things into account. It can't take emotion into account. Sometimes there's just certain words you want to bring out more, or certain just breaths, certain things, like I said earlier, where people are tailing off the end of words, where there's just so much emotion in it. An automated plugin is never going to pick up on that. So if you're in a tight spot, you want to do it quickly, go for it. But generally, I much prefer just to do it manually. So just to recap here, if anyone joins within the next, how long have we got? I'm going to keep answering questions, but if anyone joins within the next 45 minutes, you get those bonuses. Just a couple of shout outs here. So August, thanks for joining us. Mark joined. Thank you for joining us, Mark. Paul as well. Good to see you back, Paul. If you're still here watching, I'd love to know, if you type in the chat box, what made you decide to join? Because I love finding out why people are joining, because there's different reasons. Some people, it's their own music and they just really want to be proud of it. For other people, it's because they just love producing great mixes and they're just in love with this stuff. So Mark, Paul, August, anyone else that's joined that's watching, let me know in the chat what the number one reason you joined was. I think that'd be an interesting exercise. And I'm going to carry on with these questions. So we are on Joe. I'm going to do my best to get through all of these, guys. So Joe asks, compression on acoustic guitars, both rhythm and picking, do's and don't. There's no kind of rule there, Joe. It just, again, this goes back to having an intention. If it's a solo acoustic guitar piece and just vocals, probably won't need compression. right? If it's just like a stripped back acoustic piece, maybe just a bit of light compression will work. If it's a heavy rock mix, let's say it's like a Radiohead track where it's like a 7-piece band and there's an acoustic guitar in there with the 7-piece band, but it's much lower in the mix. Well, in that case, I'd probably compress it quite heavily because you'd want it to kind of sit at this constant level. You wouldn't necessarily hear the kind of the over compression. And that's the main caveat here. If it's really noticeable, just be careful with compressing a rhythmic guitar, because, or any rhythm guitar part for that matter, because if it's kind of sustained chords or anything like that, sometimes you can hear the compressor pumping. So that's when just tweaking the release time is important, to make sure you're not hearing that pumping of the compressor. But it really does depend on the context. So think about it. Do you need it to be consistent? Or do you want it to sound natural? And that's going to kind of help you to decide how much compression to use. Paul asks, how do I minimize the sound of my computer being in the same room as my mic? Great question, Paul, because I bet most people here are in that same situation, right? So first of all, cardio microphones. If you're recording at home, cardio microphones are just so bloody useful because you can point them away from noise sources, first of all. So if your computer's here and you're recording in the middle of the room, just point the mic away from the computer, and that's going to minimize that noise from the computer fan. And of course, you can go further with this. The cardioid mics, you can point away from windows or highly reflective surfaces to reduce those reflections. You can point them away from the window, especially if it's a road outside and getting road noise, or maybe noisy neighbors is the issue. So you point it away from a conjoining wall, something like that. So cardioid mics will definitely help with that. Other than that, if you're going for like a really important recording session, it might be worth just kind of temporarily moving the computer out of the room for the day if you can, just so you don't have to worry about it at all. But the quickest way to solve this is using a cardioid mic. Steve-O, drums, they are sounding worse. If you can elaborate on that a bit, hopefully I can help with that. Abby said, is it a good idea to everything using a single mixing plugin like iZotope, Alloy, or Sawyer Nectar for vocals? So I think, to kind of rephrase that, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, what you're asking, is it okay to use one of those single plugins that kind of does everything, like a channel strip, right? And yes, it is, absolutely. Maybe not iZotope, Alloy, or Nectar. I'm just not a fan of those plugins, those kind of, if this is the ones that I'm thinking of, those automated ones where you just press vocals and it does like this kind of, does it for you. I don't like anything like that. Don't know a lot about it because I always just kind of ignore it. But channel strips are great. So if you've got a channel strip in your DAW, for example, Pro Tools actually has a channel strip plugin, and not a lot of people know this, but what that means is it's just one plugin, and you have in order, like on a mixing desk, a channel strip. So you have compression, EQ, normally a gate, de-esser, all in one plugin. And that's great. First of all, it can stop you from over processing because it's all there and you just load it up, and it prevents you from using, 3 or 4 EQs and really over processing the vocal because you try to just make do with what you've got. Really, it just comes down to preference of workflow. Depends what plugins you've got. Personally, I don't really use channel strips. I do use the Slate Digital VMR, which is a great plugin for anyone that's kind of in that point where they're branching out from stock plugins. VMR has compression and EQ. That's probably the only one I use. And it's absolutely fine. It does the same thing. So just to quickly check these over. So Natalie, thanks for sharing this. Natalie said, reason for joining Produce Pro Vocals. I'm in the process of recording and producing 2 projects that are intended as demos for interdisciplinary shows, but I want them to sound as high quality as possible without bringing it to a studio. Getting lots of helpful info here. Thank you. So thanks, Natalie. Yep, I think that's going to do exactly what you want for you. Peter said, I'm a student engineer. I got courses on mixes, but I just want to learn as much as I can and keep making my mixes better. Love the enthusiasm, Peter, and also have tips from other people on the chat. So if anyone else is here that's actually part of the program, feel free to chip in and just tell us why you joined. Shout out to Nick as well, who just joined us. Thanks for joining us, Nick. Let me know if you have any issues. Just to recap again, we've got 40 minutes now till those bonuses go away, so not long. Jonathan asked, what is your best answer to creating wide vocals so they sound left and right and up the center? So this very much goes back to the reverb and delay, right? So the lead vocal pretty much all the time is going to be panned down the middle, at least at some point. I have mixed tracks before where I've panned the vocal hard left for verses because it sounded really cool. But generally it's down the middle. So to create stereo width, you need to use effects. You need to use stereo effects. That's the only way you can do it. Of course, backing vocals come into it here, and I pretty much always pan backing vocals hard left or hard right if there's more than one. Even if there's just one, it'll go one way or the other. That'll add width to the kind of vocals in general. But for the lead vocals, stereo delays with the different time on the left and right. Check the replay if you want to go back over that. Also, reverb, just subtle reverb, subtle plate reverb, just kind of tucked underneath, barely noticeable, can add a bit more width. You can even use subtle chorusing. I do this quite a lot. Just add some stereo chorus, very, very subtle to the vocal. Just bring it up till you notice the chorus and then back it off a bit. And that's a great way to just bring in subtle effects. So yeah, stereo effects. Rob, are you putting the templates back up? Yeah, so I'll have to sort that out. I'm not sure why the link isn't working. What I'll do, Rob, and anyone else that wants those templates, rather than you all sitting here now and watching me sort that out, which probably isn't the most productive use of mine or your time. In a couple of hours, you'll get a link to the replay, and I'll make sure there's a link to the templates in that. So if you want those vocal mixing templates, they come with Produce Pro Vocals, but also they're free bonus for you coming here live. So check the replay email for those. Okay. Maybe silly question on compression. Some compressors have a makeup gain toggle. Do you feel it should be on or off? Always off. So I think what you probably mean by the toggle, generally if it's a toggle, it's auto gain, which is a function that a lot of compressors have where it will automatically bring the gain back up. But big issue, for some reason, whether it's just because they want to make people think their plugins are better than everyone else's, it always turns it up in volume way too much. So then you think you've made it sound better because you're bypassing to check. And when you bring the compressor back in, it's louder. And it's not sounding better, it's just louder. And that tricks you into thinking it's better. So never use auto gain. Adjust the gain manually. And there's an easy way to do it. Check the meters on your compressor. If you're applying 2 or 3 dB of gain reduction, if you're applying 10 dB of gain reduction, that gives you an idea of how much makeup gain you have to apply to bring it back up to the same volume. And that's your aim here. You want a volume match. You want the same volume coming out of the plugin as going in. So to kind of elaborate on that example, if you've got 3 dB of gain reduction on average on the compressor, you probably just need 2 dB of makeup gain, because of course it's not ever exactly the same. It's not that it's always 3 dB of gain reduction. It's just every now and then. So kind of just less. If it was 10 dB of gain reduction, maybe you'd need 7 or 8 just to bring it up to the same level. You just want to then bypass it, flick it on and off a few times, and check that it's the same volume. And then you can take a second to say, okay, right, now I'm going to shut my eyes or whatever and just bypass it, bring it back in, bypass it, bring it back in, and check that you've actually made it sound better. Peter asked, best compressors, best reverbs, best EQs, etc. So for most people, the ones that come with your door, stock plugins are absolutely incredible now. You don't need to go out there and spend a fortune on premium plugins. Don't even bother going out there to look for free plugins, because you can waste so much time checking reviews, finding free plugins, and then installing them and then having to learn them, figure out how they work. And if you're just constantly using new plugins all the time, you never truly get to know the plugins you've already got. And that's the quickest way to improve, is just using the same tools over and over until you really know them. So stick with your stock plugins until you get to a point where you know you're ready. You're noticing that they're holding you back. Quick little guideline: if you think that your mixes are bad because of stock plugins, hate to break it to you, but first of all, you're wrong. And secondly, you're definitely not ready to buy plugins. Until you get to the point where your mixes are sounding great with stock plugins, don't go out and buy any plugins, because you need to focus on developing your skills, not on buying plugins. And this is so important because you can waste so much time and money. It's such a distraction, such a huge distraction, because there's so much marketing. But to answer your question, if you are in that point where you're ready to start buying premium plugins to take your mixes to the next level, first of all, a really good kind of starter pack that I recommend is the Waves, I think it's called Artist 2 bundle. Basically, it's the Waves Renaissance plugins. They have like one for everything. They have a really great compressor. They have a really great EQ. They've got a great reverb. They've got a really good vocal compressor where it's just one control and it sounds amazing. So check out that stuff. It's highly affordable and it sounds great. And then after that, I recommend having one plugin for each type. Don't have like 5 different premium EQs. Just pick one and stick to it again. Other than that, Slate Digital stuff I like. The VMR comes with, that's another good option, comes with a really good EQ and a really good compressor. And then if you're really down the line, FabFilter is my favorite kind of like premium plugin manufacturer, or some of the more expensive Waves emulations. But again, most people here won't need to worry about that kind of stuff. Brody asked, just purchase music and audio production in Logic Pro from you. I only want to learn how to record, mix, process vocals. Will this course benefit me even after just purchasing the other course? Is there additional course content that will help me learn further? Absolutely. So Brody, the Logic Pro course is important, because if you're new to Logic Pro, getting to know that piece of software is so important, so you can navigate it properly, so that it's not kind of holding you back. You want that stuff to be kind of subconscious. That's really the first step, getting to know your DAW. And also in that course, all the basics are covered. I kind of go into like basic mixing and songwriting and production, that kind of stuff. So that's the Logic Pro course is really a good introduction to that piece of software specifically, but also just to recording and mixing in general. Whereas this is the perfect next step to really focus on the vocal. So once you have kind of a good, reasonable understanding of some of the terms, and just to be clear, this course is still perfect for beginners. It's not an advanced course, but just having a basic understanding of your DAW will help. So this is the perfect kind of next step from that, to now focus on something more specific, i.e. the vocals. And then after that, the membership program is great as kind of a more ongoing development and to get a bigger picture, but going into much more depth. So if anyone else does have any more questions about the course, please do ask them. We've got half an hour left now. I'm going to keep taking questions. I'm going to try and work through all of these. So keep the questions coming. But half an hour left now to grab those bonuses. If you join within the next half an hour, you'll get that Audio 101 course. So again, just to really make sure you have a firm grasp of the basics. And that's actually an extract from my Logic Pro course. So if you're a student of the Logic Pro course, you would have already seen this. If you're not, though, this is going to give you that fundamental foundational knowledge of basic audio recording and mixing to then get the most out of the course. And the second free bonus, only if you join within the next half hour, is that Mixing with Saturation workshop, because saturation is such a cool, fun to use, exciting tool that is important for taking your mixes to the next level and really getting that finished professional studio sound. So those bonuses are available to you if you join within the next half an hour. And like I said, I'm going to keep answering questions here until everyone's happy. So again, shout out to Nick for joining, and also Natalie. Great to have you with us, Natalie. Anyone that's joined now, you'll already have a link in your inbox to jump straight in. But if you do have any questions, just post them here and I'd be happy to help out. John said, printing plugins to the track. Should I do this just for the first few basic steps or do it all at the end? Well, John, there's no need to print at all. The only time you would print plugins to the track is if you were sending them to someone else to get mixed and it was an effect. Maybe it's an effect on the guitar that's just an important kind of element of the song or the production, so you don't want to lose that. You would print it. Other than that, if you were recording with hardware, if you were recording through a compressor, for example, that would be printed. But you don't need to print plugins if you're just mixing. You just have your plugin chain, you leave it like that, and then you bounce down your stereo mix. and you don't need to commit by printing. Joe said, compression on acoustic rhythm, picking guitar, I think I've already answered that one. Peter, not a question, but just a tip. On Waves, you can download a demo. It's very useful. I do that before any plugins I buy. I get the demo. Great shout. Again, just as a kind of disclaimer, try not to get kind of too caught up in that world, but that is a great shout if you are at that point where you're ready to start buying plugins. I didn't even know they did demos, so that's a cool piece of advice. Thanks for sharing that, Peter. Ted asks, do you recommend using a stereo width plugin? So let's just bring that up here. Ted, I think you mean on the mix in general. If not, please elaborate on that. To get stereo width in a mix, and I'm going to kind of go off vocals here for a second, it mostly comes from panning. Just using, not being afraid to pan hard left and hard right. That's where the bulk of the width comes from. After that, it's then stereo effects are going to enhance that even more. If you want to have a really wide mix, there are some great mid-side processing plugins out there that are great. I don't really use them, so I'm not going to recommend one in particular. If I want to do any kind of mid-side processing, I actually use the FabFilter stuff, because their EQ, for example, it allows you just to turn up the sides and turn down the center, which kind of enhances the stereo width. But I try not to mess with that kind of stuff too much. BX, I believe Brainworks make a really good free stereo enhancement plugin that might be worth checking out. Again, it's mid-side processing. There's this kind of stereo width enhancement plugins that what they do is they mess with the phase. That's what you want to avoid, because they're the kind of ones that just kind of trash your mix as soon as you push it too hard. Sometimes if you're really, really subtle with them, they work, but it's kind of risky. They can do so much damage. So if you are going to look into that, well, check out Brainworks. I can't remember what it's called, but Brainworks make a stereo width enhancing plugin that works on mid-side processing, which is just mid-side processing is just purely the act of in this specific situation, turning up the sides or the middle, or turning down the sides, turning down the middle in relation to each other. So you're turning up the left and right and turning down the center, or turning up the center and down the left and right. That kind of stuff generally won't have as many negative side effects on your mixes if you do want to make them even wider. Okay, so keep the questions coming. Michael, do you ever double track vocals? Yeah, for sure. It's a great technique. It's especially good for choruses, just to add that extra layer. In terms of, first of all, in terms of recording, with double tracking vocals, you do need a good vocalist, because you want it to be exactly the same or as similar as humanly possible. If you have a vocalist where they're singing it differently every time they do a new take, and they try to double track the vocal, but it sounds quite different, this is when it can start to sound messy. It can also start to have this kind of weird tonal relationship where they're kind of engaging with each other in terms of phase, and it can get kind of strange. So if you are going to do it, try and get the vocalist to get it spot on the same both times. What you can also do is change the tone a bit. So to get some separation between the two parts, you could get the vocalist, or if you're the vocalist, back up from the mic a bit more, or move a bit closer just to change the tone a bit, so it's not exactly the same. And that means when you then come to mixing, if you're going to pan them hard left and right, which is a common technique, and this is all covered in more depth inside the course. There's a whole lesson on working with double track vocals, but just to kind of give you a brief summary, if you're panning hard left and right, that's a really nice way to add this kind of impactful width and kind of depth in choruses and stuff. And then that's why it's nice to have a different tone, because if you have left and right and they've got different tone, it makes it wider, and you can enhance that more with EQ. Or the other way you can approach it is sometimes it's nice just to have the main vocal part and then the double track vocal just kind of tucked underneath very quietly in the middle as well. So there's a couple of ways to approach it. Mike, does this course go over vocal harmonies and aligning them? Not so much in terms of backing vocals. So pitch correction is covered, and it's essentially the same thing. Pitch correction is covered quite a lot, because a lot of people approach it so wrong. You don't want to be using those kind of auto-tune plugins unless you want that T-Pain robot auto-tune sound. Instead, what you want to do is manually pitch correct, not auto-tune, pitch correction, the lead vocal. And this is going to translate into backing vocal parts as well. So once you've got that basic technique and best practices and the right approach down, you can then take that, apply it to lead vocals, apply it to backing vocals, anything like that. In terms of aligning them, maybe you mean more in terms of editing. That's also covered. We do cover editing. There's a whole module on editing, just in terms of like time editing, that kind of stuff. Let me know if I kind of missed your question there, if you want me to elaborate on anything with that. So let's see what other questions we've got. How long have we got? So we've got 25 minutes now. So Benji asked, so I'm recording a project that is far too important for my amateur self. Don't be harsh on yourself, Benji. To finally mix. I send the tracks to a pro mixing engineer. Question is, as I get a nice pre-mix with plugins, etc., how much processing should I print to the tracks that I send to my mixing engineer? Good question. So first of all, if the nice mix is sounding good, you could just spend more time working on that and developing your skills. But obviously I understand there's times when you're, like you said, it's important. So you're sending it off. So in that case, first of all, make sure you send them your pre-mix, and what this would be called, or most people would refer to this as a rough mix. So this is the rough mix from the original artist or the producer or something like that. It's how they want the mix to sound. So the mix engineer, if they're a good mix engineer, will take that rough mix, and anyone that's listening that's kind of on the other side of the fence here, this is good advice. They'll take that rough mix, and then their aim is to essentially capture the same vibe, the same emotion, the same character as that rough mix, but just enhance it sonically, make it high fidelity. So you're the artist, so it's important to you that the balance is similar, because that's part of the composition, right? So make sure you send them that so they have an idea of what you're going for, what direction you're going, and what vibe you want. And then it's just their job to kind of match that feeling, but just improve upon it and make it sound better, but still in the same kind of direction. So send them that. In terms of processing, pretty much bypass everything. You want to send them just the raw tracks. The only exception there is if there's any effects that are kind of part of the song. So maybe there's a guitar part where the delay is, like a really integral part of the sound. And normally that would be printed anyway if you recorded it live, because the guitarist would be doing it with like an effects pedal or something. So they're the only kind of things you want to print, things that are essential and integral to the arrangement or to the piece. Other than that, bypass everything and send them the raw tracks. Rob, I write songs, so your complete guide and vocal tips are great tips. I'm pretty new to Logic, so all advice is greatly appreciated. Well, hopefully, Rob, you've taken some stuff away from this, and that can help you with your music. Simone, I'm a recording artist, and I was offered the opportunity to produce an indie project. Go for it, definitely. It's great to go out there and start just implementing all of this stuff. That's how you get good fast. Okay, Mark said, and thanks for sharing this, Mark. I joined because although there are quite a few videos out there, I really like your approach and professionalism. I also felt that the content included seemed more than fair for the price. Although my ego barges me to learn on my own, I feel that it's time for me to learn from the best. So thanks, Mark, for sharing that. That means a lot. And to be fair, you are right. No one can learn on their own. And ego is a big part of it. Everyone has an ego that's they're battling with. The sooner you can overcome that, the sooner you can improve in all walks of life. This isn't just related to mixing. So many people try to go it alone, or they try to learn from forums, that kind of stuff. And eventually you just kind of end up quitting because it's hard. It is really hard to learn, and people underestimate that. So going it alone is never a good idea. So I'm glad you joined us, Mark. Give me a shout if there's anything I can help with. Peter, VMR is very, very good. Glad you agree with that. Ram said, hi Rob, I'm a singer and I want to make cover songs on some karaoke tracks. So will your course teach me how to mix vocal with karaoke track to cut through the mix better? So no, Ram, that's not covered specifically. It's not something that I personally deal with often, so it's not something that I covered. I do have a student though, Taran, who did exactly that. He took the course. He's a hip hop artist. He's a rap artist. Really cool stuff. He's a really young guy, and he took all of the lessons from the course and applied them to mixing his voice to a 2-track, to a backing track. And it sounded phenomenal. He's like one of the best students I've ever had. So it's not covered specifically, but it all falls under the same umbrella. Once you know how to really process vocals, and that's what the main focus is here. So that's going to help you immensely. But then you can also apply that to the backing track, because like I said earlier, it has a knock-on effect. So it's all going to sound better, but also the techniques you learn are going to help you in all other areas of mixing. And just to give you a little example there, so range allocation, which I touched on today, that thing where you create some space in the backing track for the vocals by cutting frequencies where you boosted them on the lead vocal. So something like that is super applicable, especially when you're working with a backing track, because you need to create this pocket for the vocal. So there's specific techniques that are covered in a lot more depth inside the course that will be very specific to what you're doing, Maram. Peter, big tip, use mid sides and you can bring up high frequencies on the sides and more low in mid in the center. Exactly. That's another great way. This is why I love the FabFilter stuff. And just kind of a quick disclaimer here. I just want to exaggerate again. Panning is where you get most of that width. But when you're really getting to that point where you're taking your mixes to that, that top kind of level of studio, mainstream, awesome quality, and you're looking for now the finer things that can just take you a little step further, mid-side processing is definitely one of those things. And the FabFilter EQ is great for that. Exactly. You just boost the high frequencies on the side. You can cut the low frequencies on the side because you don't need them, and you can EQ the middle independently, etc. And this is just another way you can enhance the width. But yeah, thanks for sharing that, Peter. Jonathan, Mike. So if we've got any more questions, I think I'm seeing repeat here. Let's have a look. So just under 20 minutes now to join if you want to grab those bonuses. Quick recap, Audio 101 course, which is going to cover all of the fundamentals. So if you're a beginner, this is perfect for you just to get a solid understanding before you dive into the course. And also the mixing saturation course, which is perfect for you to do afterwards. So once you finish the vocal course, you can focus on saturation and taking your mixes to the next level. So quick shout out now to Sela. Hope I said that right. Sela, thanks for joining us. And also Mark, great to have you in the course, Mark. If you're still here watching, again, would absolutely love to hear from you. Let me know why you joined and give me a shout if you have any questions or drop me an email. Ted said, reason for joining, I own a publishing company I use in my in-house studio to record most of my artists. I've over 5 years experience, but missed some of the basics along the way. Just looking to raise the bar on my vocal sound. Thanks for your help. Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Ted. Mihai, could you put a replay with the text box window also? Information in the chat box is also very important. Yep, it'll be an exact replica. It will look exactly as the same, as it does now. Okay, Ram. Jeff A, thanks for joining us. No worries. Have a good day, evening, wherever you are. Could be either. Sharon, no problem. Brody, just purchased, looking forward to digesting the information. Great to have you with us, Brody. And if we've got any more questions here, okay, from Bjorn. I have a good friend called Bjorn. How long hours does the course take? I want as much content as possible. So in terms of actual video content, there's about 6 hours of content. And then there's the bonuses on top of that, which will bring that up a bit. The thing that I've had a lot of good feedback on with this course, and I don't talk about it too much because it's hard to get absolutely all of the details in, but a lot of this course is designed in a way that it forces you to implement this stuff. You can't just dive in, have a look at a couple of lessons and jump back out. You have to go through it linearly. So it encourages you to actually implement what you're learning. So if you want to do it quick and you're down on time, you can do that. You can sit down whenever you've got some free time, even if it's just an hour a week or less, you can just progress through the lessons. If you really want to take your time with this and get everything you can out of it, then make sure you complete every single assignment. There's assignments for every module where you actually go away and you implement what you're learning. There's even assignments within the lessons for you to go and practice, because that's where you really improve. So Bjorn, if you want a lot of content, you could spend 20 plus hours on this if you really took your time, went through, covered everything in a lot of detail, and made sure you implemented absolutely everything. There's a lot to work through there. But equally, if you're pressed for time, this is the great thing about having a self-guided course. You can log in when you want, progress through, and you can do it in just the span of a few hours. If you're struggling to really find the time to implement it, you can do that too. Mike, what do you think of Vocalign for aligning vocals? Mike, to be completely honest, I haven't heard of it, so I haven't used it, but I always just do it manually. Generally, if I'm working for a client, I don't do editing, so in that case, it doesn't really apply. If it's my own music, then I'm very happy to take the time to go through and edit it manually, and I think that's important. If I am sent multi-tracks that by a client that just need editing, then of course I will go through do that, but again, always manually, because I think that's just the best touch. You can never beat the human touch, but if you're in a tight spot, these kind of automated things can be helpful. Benji, no worries at all. Have a great day. And Simone, thank you for the encouragement and the golden info, Rob. Take care, and I'll be in touch. Hubert, are you using multiband compression in your vocal chain beside for de-essing? Hope this question was not already there, as I was a bit disconnected. So no, Hubert, no one had asked this question, and it's a great question. Didn't have time to cover it today. Again, multiband compression is covered in depth in the course, and I think it is an important part. To go back to that idea of, when you're ready to take it to the next level, this isn't one of the main tools available to you. Focus on the main tools first, but once you've got a great sound with EQ, compression, volume balancing, automation, multiband compression, super useful on vocals. I use it more on vocals than anything else, because vocals, they change so much, right? When a vocalist changes register, the tone and the character of their voice changes. So what this means is, if you're relying just on EQ, let's say there's just certain words or phrases sound a bit muddy when the vocalist drops to a low level. I have this problem a lot because I'm a bass vocalist, so a lot of the time it sounds muddy. But then when the vocalist starts singing louder and they open up and they project a bit more, you lose that muddiness, right? So let's say you try to fix that muddiness with EQ. So you grab an EQ and it's sounding really muddy. So you're really aggressive with it, and you're cutting 4 dB quite broad in the lower mid range. And when you're listening to those phrases or sections that are in the lower register, it sounds great. But then suddenly the next verse, the chorus, the vocalist moves up a register. They start singing higher in a higher pitch. And suddenly, because you've cut all these frequencies out to get it sounding good in the lower parts, when they're singing higher, it sounds weak and thin. All right. So this is an issue that we come across quite a lot with vocals, because it does vary so much. Now, this is why it's important to be, first of all, subtle with EQ, because these really big problems, you can't normally just fix them with EQ alone. This is why it's important to spend time on the recording phase. This is why sometimes you need EQ automation. But also, multiband compression is great, because what you can do is you can apply it, and you essentially tell it to only compress 300 hertz, which is, let's say that's where the mud is, and it probably is. You can essentially tell it to only compress those frequencies when they get too loud, because that's all you're doing. A multiband compressor is just compressing a specific frequency range or multiple frequency ranges. So this is the simplest way to use it. You just engage one band, you put it around where the mud is, and you can find that by using boost and sweep if you have to. And then you just adjust the threshold so that the compressor only engages on those frequencies when the singer's in that lower register, and it's sounding muddy. So then the compressor clamps down, it reduces those frequencies, so it sounds clear. But then when the vocalist moves up into another register, another octave, the compressor stops working, because those frequencies aren't prominent anymore. So now it's just leaving them alone. It's leaving them there. So now it sounds nice and warm, even when they're singing louder. So multiband compression, it is important. I do use it a lot on vocals, and that's covered in more depth in the course. Bjorn, I'm not very familiar with your courses, so I don't know how you approach things. What kind of music do you focus on in your course? I feel like there's a different way to approach R&B vocals, say rock vocals. So yeah, absolutely great question. So all of the genres are covered to the extent, as much of an extent as I can. I try to teach in a way that's not specific to either one DAW or one genre. I do kind of lean more to the side of rock music because that's generally what I work with, and pop music, mainstream music, because that's also what I work with a lot. So R&B probably falls under that kind of mainstream umbrella a lot of the time. But rest assured that all of the genres are covered. I've had all kinds of graduates from this course, people doing hip hop, who I was telling you about earlier, the rap artists, rock, folk, acoustic, jazz, really heavy hardcore music, mainstream pop, absolutely everything, and everything is covered. There's an entire lesson just on approaching different genres. So to give you the answer, personally, I lean more towards rock and pop, but I try to cover everything as well as I can. Paul, thanks for this webinar. I have to go. No worries, Paul. Thanks for joining us. Brody, can you touch up on preamp and audio interfaces if there really is audio quality difference when you fork over the big bucks? So great question. And this again goes back to that idea of when you start out focusing on the things that have a big impact. Some of you might have heard me talk about the 80-20 principle before. And without going into too much depth, because I could talk about it for hours, the idea is that 80% of the results in anything, this isn't just mixing, this is business, this is economics, it's actually the guy that discovered it, it was that 20% of the pea pods in his garden produced 80% of the yield of peas. It's just this common trend. Some people call it the power ratio, Pareto's principle, 80-20 rule. Essentially, the idea is that 80% of the results come from 20% of the effort. So there's this uneven distribution between results and effort, right? So the efforts that get you 80% of the way to a good mix are the fundamentals, are the main four tools at your disposal: volume balancing, EQ, compression, and panning, right? After that, you've got the 7 main plugins. So EQ, compression, reverb, delay, limiting, gain, and gates. With those 7 plugins alone, you can get great mixes. So you focus on those plugins. Now, to relate this to your question, 80% of the sound is never going to come from a small decision such as preamps, right? It's such a small influence on the end sound that it's really not worth worrying about until you're 80% of the way to a studio level, high quality, amazing sound and mix. When you get to that 80% of the way by focusing on the essentials and spending your time there, you're ready to start thinking about things like preamps. When you can hear the difference between different preamps, you're ready. Ultimately, though, the listener's not going to hear this stuff. It's not, where the bulk of the mix comes from. It's not where you should focus too much of your time. It's so easy to get carried away with equipment, comparing different things. Essentially, there is a difference, but it's so minute that pretty much all of us who are musicians, and myself and some other people here will be freelance mix engineers, but most people here will be musicians who record at home. Don't worry about preamps. Like, just get the best thing you can afford for the money. Affordable equipment is so good now. The preamps sound great on most low-end interfaces that it's really not worth worrying about. Okay, so just under 10 minutes left, everyone. If you want to get those bonuses, just one last reminder, 10 minutes left to get those 2 extra bonuses. And just one more quick shout out to everyone that's joined here. So John, August, Catherine, Mark, Paul, Nick, Natalie, Silla, Mark, and more. Thanks for joining the course. It's great to have you on board. And give me a shout if you've got any questions. If anyone else is on the fence now about joining, remember that 30-day refund policy. If you're not 100% sure if this is right for you, or if you're not sure if it's the right timing, if you're not sure if it's going to be good enough to deserve your money, anything like that, whatever your reason is, if you think you don't have time, just give it a go. And if you don't enjoy it, you find you really don't have time for it, then I'll be happy to return your money, no questions asked. So if you're on the fence and you just want to make sure you get those bonuses before they disappear, join risk-free and we can always refund you later. And then anyone else that's thinking about it, it's actually closing on Friday. So today is the last chance to get those bonuses in the next 5 minutes. But you can join the program until Friday. That's when it closes. And then I'm going to shift my focus to working with the new students. Okay, so let's see if we can fit in a couple more questions quickly. Steve, what if I don't get paid till next week? How can I take advantage of your offer? Steve, so it's closing on Friday. I don't know if that's in time. It's not fair for me to make exceptions. So on Friday it closes and that's it. But we will be opening up again in a few months. There is a waiting list. So if you can't join by Friday, you can either just go to produceprovocals.com and the waiting list is there. You can join the waiting list. Or if you just check any of the emails, click through any of the links that you've been receiving this week, it will take you to a waiting list after Friday. And that means you'll get notified next time it's open. Brody, can you touch? I've already done that one. Jonathan, what is your best answer when mixing a mono to use panning? I struggle to understand the techniques of separating tracks in mono when you can place them where you want with panning. What are your thoughts? So Jonathan, the main aim really, and the reason mixing a mono is such a good technique is because you want to create separation with EQ. And that's what it really helps with. There's other elements here. Balancing, getting the volume balance right in mono helps a lot as well. You often do have to adjust it after flipping to stereo, because if you set the levels of a guitar part in mono and then you pan it hard left or hard right, it can kind of change your perception. But I think getting the initial volume balance in mono helps you to just find the perfect relationship for everything. And then using EQ to create separation rather than relying on panning means you're going to get much better clarity and separation in your mixes, because you're not just using panning as a clutch. You're focusing on EQ to create that separation. And then when you get towards the end of the mix and you're like, okay, it's time to start panning, it just opens up because you've created this separation with EQ. So then when you start panning things, it just sounds incredible because you've gone through that effort of making sure everything's got its own little space, so that when you pan it, it just exaggerates that even more. Rather than the kind of opposite way would be to pan right at the beginning. And let's say you pan one guitar part hard right, and then the vocals in the middle. And because it's panned, you don't really notice that it's like massively interfering with the vocal. So then if someone's listening in mono, or if they're listening just in general on speakers, anything like that, there's not going to be as much room for the vocal in the mix. So instead, it's better to do it the other way around. Get the separation with EQ first, and then panning just kind of enhances that separation even more. Bjorn, thank you so much for answering my question. You seem like you're a humble guy and that you really take your time with students. I wouldn't pan and buy a course, but just seeing this webinar changed my mind. I mean, can't wait to see what I'll get out of the course. Bjorn, very, very happy to help. Amazing to have you on board, buddy. And give me a shout if you have any questions at all, or if there's anything I can help with. Abby, are you going to still produce courses and release them on Udemy, or these private courses will be your way of teaching students going forward? Yeah, so Udemy was kind of one of the first courses I made. So I'm not really focusing on Udemy. This is my main focus now. The Logic Pro course, though, I still am going to update. There's going to be an update coming soon because it's always changing. But no more courses really, I think, will be released on Udemy. It will be here. This is my main focus now. Okay, so any more questions, please do give me a shout. I know there's probably quite a few people here who are watching from Udemy. So if you have any more questions on that front, then please do let me know. The reason I'm leaving Udemy is just because this is just so much more fun. I love having a personal relationship with my students, and Udemy is not great for that. So this is kind of my way of moving forward. This is what I love doing. So any more questions, let me know. We've got, how long have we got? 3 seconds. That's it. We've run out of time. So if anyone missed that, no problem. We're open till Friday. One quick shout out now to Bjorn. Thanks for joining us, Bjorn. And I hope you all found this very useful. I'm going to be doing more sessions like this. I love hanging out with you guys and answering your questions. I just think this is an incredible way of teaching. So thank you so much for being here. It's an absolute honor to teach you, to have you listening to me for over 2 hours. It's kind of crazy. So thank you so much for being here. Hopefully there's a lot that you can take away from this. Just make sure you actually go and implement this. That's where the magic happens. It's no good having this all rattling around in your brain. You need to actually go out and practice this stuff. But thank you for being here. I'll make sure there's links to the door templates and the presentation slides, the presentation deck in the email that you'll get with a couple of hours. That will also have the replay video, which you can watch if you want to recap anything. But yeah, thanks everyone. Have a great day. Have a great evening, depending on what time it is there. See you all very, very soon.